IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Tuesday. We are one day closer to Notre Dame kicking off against Miami, and we have a long road ahead before we get there. Now, I will say there is a lot of things that we have to cover before we do get to August 31st, and we're finally at the point now, Bryan, where we feel like we can turn the page on spring, and now it's looking forward to the meat and potatoes of the offseason. And I'm excited to dive into everything that we're going to talk about. So today, what we're going to talk about, we're going to start out with some big news that broke today. Notre Dame has added an annual home and home series with Clemson that's going to run through 2038, which is really big news. And it's something that we've talked about before on this show. And so what we're going to do is we're going to begin with that. We're going to talk about what really the deal consists of, why it's happening, and then some of our thoughts on it. I'm going to dive into what it looks like for Notre Dame. In parts 2 and 3 of this show, what Bryan did is we've put together what we believe to be the projected depth chart, Notre Dame, where it stands going into summer camp and then into fall.
Yeah, and not just our opinion of like just us, but what we think it actually is going into the summer.
And so where that leaves us, we're going to go position by position. We're going to start part 2 on offense. And we're going to go through, why we have it the way that we do, and then some potential position battles. There's some obvious ones. Then some others that might live in the 2 deep. It's going to be pretty surface level because we're going to have a lot of content coming out over the next couple weeks, next couple months about these position groups specifically.
Yeah.
Part 3, we're going to do it on defense. Same way, same format. And then time permitting, we are going to have a mailbag at the end. So be sure to get your questions and comments in. We're going to get to as many as we can, time permitting, at the end of the show. But as always, worst case scenario, we will have another mailbag session on Thursday. And then, of course, the Friday free-for-all mailbag on Saturday. So, Bryan, busy schedule for today. I am excited to jump into this and start talking.
I am. We had a couple topics we were going to discuss today, and then they're going to be fun. So we're going to talk about that on Thursday. And with this news about Clemson series, we're like, hey, look, this will be a good time to talk about that. And then we'll kind of take Thursday's topic, which was going to be the schedule depth, going over the depth chart, and talk about it today. But this is something that's been brought up a while on this show, not just always by us, but also people in the chat have asked about it. What would your thoughts be on a Clemson rivalry? And I'm like, look, I've always been kind of pro the idea, and there's a lot of reasons for it. And so when you come out today, obviously the big news was that Notre Dame, starting in 2027, Notre Dame and Clemson have signed a 12-year rivalry. It appears that it's going to be where there's 4 games already scheduled. In those 4 games, 2 were at Notre Dame, 2 were at Clemson. So I think it's like 27, 28, like 30 and 31 or something like that. In the 2 odd years, they're at Clemson, and then the 2 games at Notre Dame were in even years. So it's actually going to work out nicely. I would assume that they're just then going to go odd years are going to be at Clemson, even years are going to be at Notre Dame, which is kind of how it is with like the Stanford and USC rivalries, but in reverse, where, the Notre Dame USC game in South Bend is always in an odd year. Stanford, that is a home game for Notre Dame. And then odd years, the games are at USC and then home against Stanford. So this will be a similar deal with USC with Clemson, is that even years it'll be at home and then odd years it'll be at Clemson most likely. There's a lot of still particulars being worked out, Trev. ACC is saying that these games will not count towards the ACC 5, with the exception of the 4 years already scheduled. Notre Dame is saying it will count towards those 5. What does that mean? Does that mean that Notre Dame is going to look to drop an ACC team from the schedule? It's very clear that one thing Pete Vivacqua wants to do is alter the ACC schedule. It's very clear that Pete Vivacqua was not happy with the ACC schedule for a number of reasons. And I think part of it is because you're seeing a guy coming from Pete Vivacqua's done a lot of things, but a lot of those things have been centered on creating a product for television. And so television revenue, even when he was, with the PGA, what's the ultimate goal? It's to create a product that's going to be consumed to a higher degree by fans on television. That's where the majority of your revenue comes from with a lot of these sports. It's your TV money. And so he clearly has an eye on that. And when you're looking at a lot of these schedules, these ACC schedules, there's a lot of years you're like, those are a bunch of games like nobody other than like Notre Dame fans are going to care about. And so that's why you're hearing Pete Bavacqua has said publicly and recently that he wants to play Clemson, Florida State, and Miami more consistently. Not necessarily every year, but more consistently. Of those three, I think we had a question that maybe is a bias a hold or as a mailbag where somebody asked essentially like about teams we'd like to play. And that's always been one I've said, I'd be okay scheduling a rivalry against Clemson. And so now you're getting that. I mean, my title of my article is Budding Rivalry Now Becomes a Thing. And, before 2015, I never would have thought, I don't care about playing Clemson. There's no history there. We've played them one time since I was born. The first game they ever played was the year before I was born. Then they played at 79 when I was not even a year and a half year old. And then they didn't play again until I was in my 30s. I didn't care about Clemson as a rival. And at the time in 2015, Clemson was kind of a joke. The phrase Clemsoning was a thing. They had some good teams here and there. The Woody Dancer years were a lot of fun with Clemson. And then obviously at that point in time, they were getting better. The Taj Boyd years were really good, during his tenure. But it was Clemsoning was a thing. You were known for choking in big games. Well, then obviously 15 season kind of kicks down the door a little bit on that. They make it to the title game, lose to Bama, go back the next year, go undefeated until late November, have that really weird loss at home to Pitt, but then roll back and you're thinking like, oh, Clemson being Clemson, they're, and then boom, they take over after that, go run the table, beat Alabama in the title game. 2 years later, they win the title again. They're in the title game again the next year. They're in the playoffs again the next year. Now people are looking at Clemson going 10-4 and being like, dude, what's happened to Clemson? And you're like, dude, 10-4 used to be like a great thing. If Tommy Bowden would have had best years that are like Dabo's worst years the last decade, he never would have been fired. It's like, so you've seen the program really take off, but then within that time frame, Trev, Notre Dame and Clemson have played each other 6 times. They played each other in 15, 18, twice in 2020. They played each other again in 2022 and then again in 2023. And there's been a couple blowouts in there. Obviously, Clemson blew Notre Dame out in 2018 in the playoff. Notre Dame blew Clemson out in 2022 and in the ACC title game, but they've also played some great games. You think of the 2015 game was a great game. The regular season game in 2020 was a great game, went to overtime. Last year's game was a little bit ugly, but it was still a good game. It was an important game. It meant something. And when you listen to Dabo Swinney talk, there's a respect from Clemson of Notre Dame and vice versa. Dabo's always been very complimentary of the Notre Dame program because I think he understands that's a program trying to do it a way that we're kind of trying to do it. And also I think Dabo's smart enough to know that unlike the other knuckleheads in the ACC, it's probably a good idea for us to be kind to Notre Dame and pro Notre Dame since they're a big reason that we're staying afloat as a league. I think Dabo's smart enough to understand that. And so you've seen sort of this growing rivalry happen on the field. They've met twice in the postseason. They've played in some very impactful games. Notre Dame knocked Clemson out of the playoff hunt in 2022. Clemson then knocked Notre Dame officially out of any playoff hunt in 2023. It was highly unlikely going into that game, but they were still like, if all this craziness happens, maybe Notre Dame could sneak into the playoff. It was unlikely, but that kind of ruined that. And now there's a lot more going at each other on the recruiting trail recently also. So I think there's a healthy respect between these two programs. They've played in some really good games, and this is a program with some tradition as well. Clemson's won 3 national titles. This isn't like some nobody program that's never won anything, and they're just cool because they have, a big, sneaker brand behind them, Oregon, that's never actually won anything, but, everybody acts like there's some traditional powerhouse. This is a program that's been, my entire life. It's been a good program for most of my life at different times, better than other periods of time. And so there's a lot that I like about this rivalry. There really is. And I think this makes a lot of sense. And it's also staying true to what Notre Dame wants to do, was to get a footprint in sort of that East Coast, and South Carolina is right in between Georgia, Florida, and then Virginia, North Carolina. So it's like right in the middle of that. And you're recruiting the same regions that Clemson wants to recruit, the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida. There's just a lot of things about this that make a ton of sense, Trev, just looking at it just as this schedule. Now, there's going to be certain years where it's like, this is a little bit, But I also think what it does is it gives Notre Dame some scheduling flexibility from like 2032 on, because they've got some big teams scheduled from now to like 31, 32. They got Texas on there, Alabama's on there. There's I think Michigan's on there at some point in time in the future. Now you've got Clemson. It gives you some flexibility to not have to maybe go get another national power. Now, if USC drops you, which we think is a shot of happening, then obviously this could then just replace USC for a time. But Stanford's likely coming off the schedule other than ACC games. Now you've got this game kind of stepping in for that, and I think I'd much rather have this game than Stanford. That's for sure. I'd prefer to have this game and USC.
Yeah,
but that you have to have two people in this conversation to want to be part of what you're doing, Trev. And unfortunately, USC's wussing out, because Lincoln Riley's goal is to schedule his way into the postseason, not exactly schedule his way into being able to win in the postseason, because he doesn't know what a winner is. Bob Stoops built one for him, and then he proceeded to make it worse and worse and worse every year. So, yeah, that's my beef with that one.
I can't say I don't blame you. And that's the USC conversation, I'm sure, is one that we're going to continually have this offseason and as the regular season goes on. But as far as this Clemson annual game until 2038, I love the decision. One thing that it does is it gives Notre Dame's schedule year in and year out a little bit more margin for error in terms of strength of schedule. I don't put as much weight into strength of schedule, especially when Notre Dame handles it the way that they do. The last couple seasons, Notre Dame has been catching flack for nationally, who have you played, and all of those kind of lazy narratives. And look, yeah, sure, you might have played a bad team. You beat them by 49. You did what you should have against a Stanford, against a Florida State that was 2-10. So, but for this, we're talking about a program in Clemson that hasn't had under 9 wins since 2010. And so even in the down years of Clemson, they're still a 9-10 win team. We saw that in 2023, and we saw that in 2024. And so what that's doing for Notre Dame's schedule as a whole is it's kind of painting the picture of like, look, even if we're playing a down year of a Clemson team, they're probably still good for 9 wins.
Well, yeah, that's kind of so let's say so Trev, I had somebody say this, and I have you speak to it, and I'll put some data to it. But somebody said, well, look, this only when Dabo leaves, this game doesn't mean as much. That was a comment that was made. I think that's kind of what you're getting to. And so the data to point this up, for all of Tommy Bowden's, the whining that people wanted to do about Tommy Bowden, the only year he ever finished under 500 was his first season. That's it. And they were 9-7, 7-9, 6, 8, 8, 9. And then in 2008, they won 7. And then he got fired. The next year, Dabo won 9. And then, of course, Dabo started his run in year 4. So Dabo goes 6-7 in his second year, and then starting in his third full year, they won at least 10 games in every year except 2023 when they went 9-4. So even if they go back to the Tommy Bowden era, this is still a 7-9 win team. That's a whole lot different than the Stanford team that's going 3-9 or Navy, because like beating a 7-5 Clemson team is going to give you more national prestige than beating a 10-2 Navy team. Not saying it should. Not saying that those Clemson teams are better than a 10-2 Navy. It's just the perception of it, to your point.
Well, absolutely. And you go through and you look at the Notre Dame opponents that they've played in the ACC. It is the Stanfords. It's the Wake Forests. It's the teams that perennially aren't the top of the league. And it's another reason why I love it. I mean, you could make the case that Notre Dame and Clemson for the better half of a decade have been the two most dominant teams in the ACC. You go back and you look, Clemson, they've gone 79-10 in the ACC since 2015. They have a .887 win percentage in conference play. Notre Dame, obviously they don't play as many ACC games a year as what Clemson does, but they're 48-9 against ACC opponents. And a good amount, like some of those losses have been to Clemson. Some of Clemson's losses in the ACC play don't count towards Notre Dame outside of the 2020 season, but still they meet, to your point, they've met more regularly over the last couple of seasons, but Notre Dame has a .842 win percentage in the ACC. And so you're putting it in a stance where, yes, Notre Dame's not in the conference, but you like when top tier teams meet in conference play across the board. Back when the Pac-12 was, really in the height of its day, at least in my time, was, Oregon and USC and Stanford when they were a good program. When they would meet, it would mean something. Back in the day when LSU and Alabama were just, that game meant so much every single year. It was always what felt like a top 10 matchup, but then Alabama's biggest rival is arguably Auburn and the Iron Bowl. And so you go and you look at different conferences, they have big matchups every single year within their conference. I think that's what this deal accomplishes.
I think so. I think for Clemson, it makes a lot of sense, right? So like we talk about, why are you making this deal? Well, for Notre Dame, it comes down to you're getting another top program on your schedule. For Notre Dame, it's getting a further footprint in a region you want to have success. For people who aren't Notre Dame fans in the chat who want to say, well, playing in a certain region doesn't matter. Yeah, it does. It does matter. So if a school from Idaho joined the SEC, would all of a sudden Southern kids start going to Idaho just because they're in the SEC? No, but that's a team in Idaho. But what gets said about when Texas joined the SEC? Well, now they're going to have more success recruiting that region because they get a why. Because they get to play all these games in front of all these top recruits in these top states. I've talked to recruits. We talk to recruits all the time. We talk to parents. We talk to high school coaches. These kids getting to consistently see Notre Dame in person, because Notre Dame plays in North Carolina almost every year.
Yeah.
And so like every year there's kids getting to go there, and you talk to these kids and they see what the Notre Dame experience is all about in there, because what do all these schools do whenever Notre Dame comes to town? They turn it into a big event. They bring a ton of recruits on campus. All the money people come back. There's sold out stadiums. There's buzz. Like you get to see all this, and these kids get there like, dude, Notre Dame's different. Like, look how these people are acting. That stuff all matters when you're trying to get into that region. It absolutely does. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And that this plays into that. It's getting another national brand on your schedule that helps you kind of sort of continue having this. I mean, it's perception, but they want it to be reality where you're playing anybody, anywhere, anytime from all over the country. And you're guaranteeing that a top team, whereas if they're just playing like Georgia Tech or Virginia, it doesn't carry the same weight. For Clemson, you're not surprised by this, because they're now moving into an era where one of two things is going to happen. Either A, they're going to stay in the ACC beyond what's it, like a 5 years left on that deal. Or not 5 years left on the deal, but in 5 years, like the buyout goes way down. If they want to get out, it makes more sense to get out. But if they choose to stay, and I've always felt that Clemson actually wants to stay in the – Florida State wants out, but they've always been like a bit of a nomad. They have an independent streak, but they wanted guaranteed conference money. That's what happened with Florida State, because they were an independent for a long time. And so what factors into this for them is if you want to stay in the league, a lot of the revenue now under the new agreement with the league is given out based on not just success of your team, but also TV revenue. Well, guess what? When Notre Dame comes to play you at your place, it's guaranteed to be crazy TV TV numbers. Every time Notre Dame's played Clemson, it's been a very, very heavily watched, including 2023 when Clemson wasn't even that good. If these two teams are both very good, this is guaranteed to be one of the 5 to 10 most heavily watched regular season games, and will without question most likely be the most heavily watched game with an ACC team. There may be some years of Florida State and Florida are both good, where that may be it, or if Florida State plays Bama, to start the season like this year, maybe then if they were good. but this is almost guaranteed to be a top 10 viewed game. So it makes a ton of sense for them to have that. Plus, they'll still play Florida State every year. They've got the South Carolina game when it's at home, all those different aspects to it, Trev. So I think this makes a lot of sense for Clemson as well. And also one of the knocks on Clemson, and I think their people are somewhat aware of this, is what was the knock on Clemson last year? The knock on Clemson last year was, well, they didn't play anybody. And the good teams they played, they got beat by. And when Clemson was getting into the college football playoffs, there was always this, yeah, but they don't play anybody thing. And now you're like, well, look, we're guaranteed to play Notre Dame every year. We're guaranteed to have at least one big game. And if you look at Clemson's future schedules, Trev, they also have South Carolina in the league, assuming they stay in the SEC. It's unlikely that South Carolina is all of a sudden going to stop playing Clemson. I mean, it's unlikely that that's going to happen. And then Clemson still has shown that they're willing to go out there and play the Georgias. And I mean, in 2029, you and I are talking about how crazy Notre Dame's schedule is going to be. And like Clemson's got some decisions to make with their 2029 schedule. But in 2029, as of right now, Clemson's going to play Georgia, South Carolina, Florida State, Miami, and Notre Dame and SMU that season. Well, no one's going to be complaining about having a soft schedule then. And what that does is twofold. Number one is it gives them they don't have to win. They could go 10-2 and not have to win the ACC and get in.
Yeah.
Where in the past, if they went 10-2, they weren't going to be viewed very well because of the overall perception of the weak schedule. But if they beat Notre Dame, then they can lose to a Georgia, lose to a South Carolina, and still have a shot to get in the playoffs without winning the ACC. I think it also helps with seeding. You know, look, the committee has shown we will give a 2-loss team that has played a tough schedule more cachet than a team that maybe has a better record that doesn't play a better schedule. That's why Indiana, who was 11-1, had to travel to Notre Dame, where Ohio State, who was 10-2, got to host a game. What's the difference? Ohio State had to play Oregon. Ohio State had to play Penn State. Ohio State had to play Michigan. And Indiana's toughest game was Ohio State, and they got blasted. You know, their overall, their schedule just wasn't nearly as tough. And so I think there's a lot of smart reasons for this. And I think Dabo also understands that unlike the coward out in Los Angeles, it's not about scheduling to get into the playoff only. Because see, here's the difference between Dabo and Lincoln Riley. Dabo actually has rings. Dabo actually took a program that was mediocre and built it into something. He didn't inherit something. I mean, Lincoln Riley is the epitome of what Jim Harbaugh said about Ryan Day. Like, he got handed this gift of a program from Bob Stoops and said, don't F it up. And they got worse every single season. He doesn't know how to build a winner. He just knows how to get into the playoffs. Because what happened every year Clemson got into, or what happened every year Oklahoma got into the playoff under Bob Stoops? They got beat every single time, and with the exception of 2017, got smashed every single time. They got smashed by Clemson when he was the coordinator. They didn't make it in 2016. They had a great game against Oklahoma or Georgia in 2017. Then they got destroyed in 2008 by Alabama, and then they had the most embarrassing non-TCU playoff game ever in a game where LSU could have hung 100 on them if they wanted to. Yeah. Did Joe Burrow have something like 7 touchdowns at halftime of that game?
Yep.
And then, of course, I think that was the last year they made the playoff under him. So Dabo understands, Coach Sweeney understands, it's not just about getting there. You have to build yourself in the regular season to go then compete for that championship once you get there. And if you've just kind of walked through a soft schedule all year, you may not be prepared to go win it. And I may sacrifice. I'd rather be the 7 seed than the 5 seed, but be better prepared as the 7 seed than be the 5 seed and just not be prepared to go win.
Sure.
So that's what I think Coach Sweeney understands that Lincoln Riley doesn't. And I'm being a little bit harsh on Lincoln Riley, but I think he deserves it. And like all the years that Clemson, LSU was smoking Notre Dame, you hear Notre Dame crying about, oh, we may not play. Oh, we have, like, what drives me nuts are these just lame USC analysts and writers who are like, but they've got to play Oregon and Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan. I'm like, name me one season where they play all those teams in the same year. Matter of fact, you might only be able to name me one. I think there's only 1 year they even play 3 of those teams if you include Washington in the same year. So I don't want to hear listing all these teams because you don't play all those teams in the same season. That's the difference between somebody like Dabo, who understands we got to challenge ourselves in the regular season. And there are advantages to playing this where Lincoln Riley's like, look, let's just go play the Big Ten and hopefully the years where we don't have to catch Ohio State, that no matter what they do to us, we can then, we'll still have our non-conference will be soft. And so we'll still be able to get in with 1 or 2 losses. Now, totally unprepared to actually win, but they'll get in, and then he can get his bonuses. And I think I truly believe that. And I'm not just saying this just to take shots at him. I truly believe this. I don't think he understands what it takes to win a championship, nor do I think he really cares. I think he's all about building up the Lincoln Riley prestige. That's what I think he cares about.
Well, that's assuming he can even get in. Since he took over the job at USC, he hasn't been able to make the playoffs, let alone build a team that can withstand.
Had a chance in year 1 and then choked away against that mighty Utah team. Yep, I understand why you had to leave the Pac-12, man. I mean, you couldn't beat Utah.
Yeah.
Beat you twice. I mean, gosh, better get out of this tough old Pac-12 league. Go join the Big Ten, because right now we're getting owned by Utah.
This move, though, I do really respect by Clemson. I respect it on both sides. But last season, Clemson did not fare well out of conference. They got worked by Georgia. They lost to Texas in the first round of the playoffs on the road in a game that wasn't really as close as what the final score may have indicated. They made a late surge in the third quarter, but when Texas wanted to, they put that game away. They lost to South Carolina at home in one of the uglier games of the 2024 season. So out of conference didn't fare well for them. So what did they do? Immediately in the offseason following, they schedule a 12-game home-and-home series with Notre Dame.
Right.
And I respect that. And then on Notre Dame's side, you could look at their future opponents like, man, Notre Dame has Alabama, they have Texas, they have Florida. They just did some home-and-homes with USC not too long ago. Maybe they'll just keep their ACC schedule the way it is, keep playing Stanford, keep playing Wake. I mean, Louisville has been good, but in the years that it's like, this is a pretty good Louisville team, they're like an 8-win team.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been very easy for Notre Dame to go away with what their program identity is and choose hard and challenge everything.
The Lamar team won 9 games.
Yeah. Yep. And so I appreciate that on both sides.
You know what else? What Clemson did not do? They did not say, well, look, man, South Carolina's really good now, and Louisville's really good now, and SMU's really good now, and we play those teams on next year. So let's try and punk out of the LSU game like USC punked out of the Ole Miss game. Let's try to get that Ole Miss game off of our schedule, which is exactly what USC did this season. They did not. Like you said, Clemson, they play LSU this year. They play at LSU next year. You look at in the past, like they just I think a year ago, maybe was it within the last year or two, they re-upped the Georgia series. So they start playing Georgia again in 2029. They play home against Georgia in 2029, and then they play at Georgia in 2030. A year they also have to play at Florida State and at Notre Dame and home against Miami. So while other teams are kind of saying, hey, we want to get out of this, we want to not play Ole Miss, we want to not play that team, Clemson is saying, no, give us those teams. Notre Dame is saying, no, give us those teams. And you know what? Props to LSU and Georgia for also scheduling those games on the other end, because LSU could easily say, even before the 12-team playoff, we already play in the SEC West, which is when this game was scheduled. They were in the SEC West. We don't need this game. We win the SEC West, we're fine. Georgia's like, we're in the SEC. We win the SEC. We're in the playoffs. We don't need this game. But those coaches understand, or at least the LSU coaches did at the time that they signed that game. I don't know if the current coach does. But Kirby Smart understands, hey, the schedule, we want a challenging schedule. I don't think Kirby liked how the SEC did them last year in the non-conference or in their conference schedule. Like, hold on a second, guys. Like, you guys are making this a little bit ridiculous. But you look at it and say they're willing to. They already play Georgia Tech every year, and now they're scheduling Clemson. They scheduled Notre Dame recently. they've scheduled there's another one that they've got coming up here soon. I have to go back and look at Georgia's schedule. But, like, I respect teams like that aren't afraid to go play people, even though there's technically no incentive. And unlike Alabama, Georgia in 2020 or 2030 plays Clemson and Ohio State. That's what it was. It was Ohio State. I knew there was another big game that Georgia scheduled. And in 2031, I believe they also play, yes, at Ohio State. So I respect teams like that, and they're doing it home and homes. Georgia also plays Florida State in 27 and 28. So I respect teams like that, Trev. 2027, Georgia right now has on their schedule Georgia Tech, Louisville, and Florida State. Why? Because they understand, look, you want to make a run in the postseason, you got to build yourself up during the regular season. You got to find out what your warts are and what your strengths are during the season. And if you're not being challenged, then you don't know the answer to that. And that's what winners do. They understand we got to push ourselves. And unlike Alabama, as I was going to say earlier, they'll actually play road games against these teams, not just constantly doing the neutral site one and done type of games. They'll say, hey, we're going to come to South Bend and play you. We're going to go up to Columbus and play you.
Yeah.
Remember when Boise was rolling and, like, almost anybody but – and this is actually something I have always liked about Oregon. They've never been afraid to play people. They played Ohio State before they joined the Big Ten. So I do give them props for that. But back then when Boise was, like, really good under Chris Peterson, Oregon and Washington would play them, but nobody out east would play them, especially after what they did to Virginia Tech. But who scheduled them for a home and home? Georgia. Actually, I think Georgia did it was actually a neutral site game. One of them was a neutral site game. But Georgia was the one to say, hey, we'll play Boise. And I think Boise beat them one year, and then Georgia beat them the other year, I think. But, like, that, I respect teams that do that. And Clemson is doing that. Clemson is not – like, Clemson knows what their league is, Trev. They know the ACC is not a powerhouse league. They could build their team up and cakewalk through that league, no problem. But they chose not to do that. They know that there's something greater than that. Yes, both games were in Atlanta. Boise won in Georgia won in 2005, and then Boise won in 2011. Both early season matchups on a neutral field. Back when nobody wanted to play Boise State because you knew you might lose. You know what I mean? So anyway, that's my thoughts on that. I think it makes a lot of sense for both teams. I really do.
One thing I think this points to is the expansion of the playoffs. What I mean by that is it's unlike previous years where you just kind of had to get through one team to make it to the national championship. And odds are it was either Clemson or a Big Ten team or an SEC team. But with the expansion of the playoffs, one thing that played into the favor of Notre Dame is that they played multiple conferences. I think we can all agree that each individual conference has its own style of football, its own brand of football. And in the 4-team playoff, it was kind of like, okay, we're either going to meet a Big Ten team or an SEC team in the playoffs. But the adjustment was always such, it was like, okay, I don't really know how this is going to go. Whereas now you could be getting a team from the Mountain West, you could be getting a team from the Big 12, ACC, SEC, or the Big 10 in the first round of the playoffs. And so now I think what teams are going to start doing and moving towards is expanding out who they face in the regular season to get an idea of, okay, like this is what the competition could mean for us in the postseason. And that's why I think the programs like the USCs, like we're talking about, who just want to tuck their tails and play Rutgers and Northwestern and Maryland, and then like 2 games against Michigan, who's not really back yet from what they were in 2023. And then let's say Penn State at home, kind of what they did this past season. It's like, okay, well then even if let's just say you guys made it to the playoffs, you're not making it far. You're continuing to challenge yourself as a program. So that's one thing that I think is going to be interesting moving forward to see if other teams continue to follow suit with what some of what is assumed to be the perennial playoff contenders year in and year out do to diversify their schedule. And that's what you reading off all of those different teams and who they're scheduling and going where. That's what that tells me is they want to get an idea and kind of test the waters a little bit of like, okay, what is it like to go play Wisconsin at home? What is it like for Clemson to go play Georgia in Athens in October? What is it like for Alabama to come up to South Bend and play them in September? And so I think all of those things too is a byproduct of the playoffs expanding to 12 teams. To
if you're smart, Like Trev, what you're laying out is what a smart coach would think.
Yep.
And so to your point, okay, well, in the past, I could understand Alabama saying, why do I need to go play out in Ohio? Why do I need to go play in South Bend? Why do I need to go play out in the West Coast when all of our regular season games are going to be in the Southeast, and every single bowl game we may play in is going to be in the southern part of the country?
Yeah.
It's either going to be in Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans, Dallas, or Pasadena, LA. Like, why do I need to go anywhere else? Okay, there's some random game in Indianapolis one year, championship games in Indy, but it's indoors. Like, there's no – now it's like, well, bro, you may have a road playoff game up in Columbus, up in South Bend, out in Eugene, out in Seattle. I mean, there's all these up in Happy Valley, up in State College, where Penn State. There's all these things now where it's like, dude, you better learn to kind of play outside your comfort zone. On top of the fact that, again, the more good teams you play, the greater the margin for error. And this is what I think the committee, to a degree, did last season. To a degree, and I hope that they continue to do moving forward, is reward the teams that play tougher schedules.
Yeah.
Reward the teams that have challenging schedules. Don't put these teams in just because they're this or that. Put the teams in with good schedules. And yes, you still need to handle your business and win those games, but give me a like and I said this last year, like if Georgia would have finished 9-3 against the schedule they would have faced, I'd have taken them over a 10-2 ACC team any day of the week for that final spot, just because of how tough their schedule was. Now, Ole Miss, well, what about Ole Miss? Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. They lost to 8-5 Florida. Like, they had one good win all year. Like, that's different than Bama, Georgia having to play Clemson. They had to play Texas on the road. They had to play Ole Miss on the road. They had to play Tennessee. They had to play Bama on the road. And they had to play Georgia Tech. That's a whole different type of schedule, and reward it. But even just practically speaking, you're going to have a greater margin for error now if you're a team that plays a more challenging schedule and handles business. And if you're not good enough, then you're not going to get to the playoff. I understand that. But teams, there's different mentalities. Some teams are understandably building to just get in. Mm-hmm. For some teams, the goal is, dude, we just want to get in. Maybe win a game. If you're Wisconsin, making the playoff is the accomplishment. And I don't say that to be disrespectful to them. If you're Nebraska right now with where you are as a program, you just want to get in. You just want to be invited to the dance. I don't even care if I have like a date. I just want to be invited to the party. Whereas when the people that are like, okay, but we're always at these parties. Now I want to be the life of the party. I want the party to be at my house now. They're different places. And so I understand some teams saying, look, we need to schedule in a way that allows us to rebuild. And that's okay. But eventually go away from that. And that was one of my issues with Art Briles, who I think in a lot of ways was a phenomenal coach. Is I understood the soft schedules when he first took over at Baylor. But once you got good, you should have stopped playing those soft schedules. And that's sort of my issue with some of these teams is like, look, you're trying to build to get there. Even a team like Michigan, who played a soft schedule in 2023, still had to play at Penn State and still had to play Ohio State at home. And then whoever you got in the Big Ten title. I mean, there at least was that. But again, they're the exception to the rule, and I think it's a little bit of a different animal now in the 12-team playoff than it was even in 2023. So I think the teams that are trying to win championships understand they have to schedule a certain way. And that's why you're seeing, even in the era of the 12-team playoff, Georgia and Clemson agreeing to a deal. Georgia and Ohio State agreeing to a deal. Those are things that I think are needed. And Notre Dame is at that place now. We got to schedule for a way, say, hey, look, we got to test ourselves to make sure we get in. I think the 2029 schedule is a little bit nuts unless some teams fall off. There's overdoing it a little bit. I think that particular schedule's overdoing it a little bit. But by and large, the goal is to prepare yourselves to win it once you get in, not to just ease your way into getting in, and then you're not upset if you get beat because you're not that team. And that's the difference between the USC and what they're trying to do and what Notre Dame and Clemson and Georgia are trying to do. That's the difference.
Agreed completely. Well, Bryan, any final thoughts on the Notre Dame Clemson deal that broke this morning?
No, I think I'm good there, Trev. I'm just curious, like, what we'll do is we'll kind of take that next section and maybe do it some other time. We'll get into the depth chart now, because one thing I want to do sort of down the road is I want to get into a conversation and about, who else should Notre Dame go after? What other team should Notre Dame look at? What adjustments and changes should be made? But I think we'll wait maybe till a little bit in the summer. But it's a funny comment from Ant VR. He says, in 29, 10-2 gets into the college football playoff.
Yeah.
If Notre Dame goes 10-2 against that schedule and it looks anything like it does, if those teams are anything like it does now, Notre Dame's not only they might be the one seed at that point in time against that schedule. The 2029 schedule, if the teams are anything like what they are now, you've got Bama at home, Texas on the road, Florida State on the road, Clemson on the road, and Georgia Tech at home, NC State on the road, and you still have to find 2 more opponents. That schedule's nuts.
And
you go 10-2 against that. If they're 2 losses or close games, you might be the 1 or 2 seed still at that point in time. That is a crazy schedule.
And that's assuming that the Notre Dame USC rivalry doesn't get renewed. So they could potentially be added to that mix as well.
Right. And I hope it does.
Me too.
I'm not like, hey, now that Clemson's on the schedule, screw USC. No, I'm not a child. Like, I still want that series always to be there. Practically speaking, does this protect you if USC chooses to back out? It does. It guarantees that you have this game on there. Whereas before, if you lose USC and you just start replacing USC with some random teams every year, there's going to be years the teams you replace them with just aren't good. And now you run into the same problem that Notre Dame has had in recent years when USC wasn't good. You anticipated this being one of the toughest teams on your schedule. You didn't realize that in 2024, when you had at USC, at Texas A&M, and home against Florida State, that those 3 teams are all going to be kind of mediocre or bad. You look at that schedule 3 years ago and you're thinking, dude, that schedule is like, if you were to look at that schedule in 2022, USC had just played for the Pac-12 title. Caleb wins the Heisman Trophy. Caleb Williams wins the Heisman Trophy. They're a game against Utah away from being in the college football playoffs. They're an 11-win team. Florida State is coming off of 10 or 11 win season that year. Is the year before they made their undefeated season. And Texas A&M was a team that was constantly still getting top 10 preseason hype. He said, boy, Notre Dame's got to play these 3 teams in 2024. Like, holy moly. That's going to be a tough schedule. Well, we're talking about how tough 29 schedule could be soft by the time we get there. We have no idea. I think it's unlikely that Alabama and Texas and Clemson are all down, but you get the point. There's an attempt there to schedule better, but I think what this does is in years where USC wasn't good, them not being good because of the way that the ACC schedule was put together by Jack Swarbrick, who in part at the time was running cover for Brian Kelly. Let's be honest. Jack Swarbrick did a lot of great things at Notre Dame. One of the things he did that I didn't like was he gave Brian Kelly cover by giving him softer schedules more often than not. Now, again, not completely, because in 2021, you did not know that Florida State was going to suck when you started the year against them on the road. You didn't know that for sure. But there was a lot of softly built schedules in recent years. But what made that worse was the fact that USC was kind of mediocre in a lot of those years. And so that kind of helped you have the success you had. But when USC was down, there were years where you're like, dude, we kind of have to go undefeated. Like Notre Dame was 11-1 in 2021. And you're like needing like Baylor to get upset and stuff like this for them to get into the playoffs because the schedule was so soft. You played one good team all year. That team beat you by 11. 11-1 wasn't getting you in the playoff. You go 11-1 against the 2017 schedule, and you're the number 1 seed. Like, seriously, because the number 1 seed that year was Clemson with a loss to 4-8 Syracuse. If you go 11-1 against the schedule Notre Dame had in 2017, where you played Georgia at Miami, you had Michigan State was a 10-win team that year. mean, you think about all the good teams that they played. USC was a 11-win team that year.
NC State was pretty
State
decent.
Was a 9-win team that year. You played 7 teams in the regular season that were ranked. You go 11-1 against that schedule, you're the number 1 seed. You go 11-1 against the 2021 schedule, you're not getting in. There's years Notre Dame could lose 2 games to get in the college football playoff. 2019, they lost 2 games and didn't even make – they went 11-2 in 2019 and didn't even finish the season in the top 10. Why? Because your signature win was Navy. That's why. Because USC was down. Now you have a little bit more protection. If USC is gone, this is a better program right now. But if USC stays on the schedule, and hopefully they do, this gives you a little bit margin for error where if they're both good, you've got a gauntlet of a schedule where your margin for error is greater. If USC is not good, you still got Clemson to build it up a little bit.
Well, this deal is going to be awesome to watch it unfold as the years go on. And sounds like common denominator here is we're both big fans of this deal. We're getting ready to move on.
Have you seen anybody? I've seen one Notre Dame fan make a negative comment about this. And his comment was strictly, I don't think they're going to be good when Dabo leaves. Which, I mean, is a fair thing to say. Like, if you think they're going to suck when Dabo leaves, it doesn't do a whole lot for you.
Sure.
But I have yet to see a Notre Dame fan that doesn't like this, Trev, which I think says a lot about what I believe is a healthy level of respect that Notre Dame fans have for Clemson. That's just my opinion. You in the chat, tell us why are most people for this series? I haven't seen anybody in the chat say that I mean, I haven't read every single in the chat, but every question in the chat, but I have yet to see anybody in the chat that's like, I hate this rivalry. I don't have any interest in playing Clemson. I haven't seen anybody do that. And you'd think that would be the case since Clemson has beat them more often than not since they've played. I think that's this difference in the psyche between Notre Dame fans and a lot of USC fans that are like, I don't want to play Notre Dame anymore. We don't need that. You know, that's the difference. I respond to the guy you responded to earlier, Trev. But I think it says a lot about the respect these programs have for each other, that the fan bases seem to be embracing this. I've only seen a few Clemson comments, and they seem to be like, sweet. And I think I like that respect. It's different than like the Miami rivalry. Like, I hate that program. I like that's fine to have a team like that, but I want a team on the schedule that I want to beat them because I respect them. You know, like, you're good if you can beat that team consistently. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't seen any backlash about this. I think it's a needle mover for both programs, which I respect. There's no, and honestly, from the Clemson side either, I haven't seen people be like, "Yo, what?"
That's what I'm saying. Like, I haven't seen any negative Clemson comments, and I think because they understand there's a healthy respect for Notre Dame as well. Trev, real quick too, before you end us out, 2 quick super chats that are related to this. One from Anthony Solomon. He says, "Thanks for the show, gentlemen. Love the Clemson deal. Appreciate you, Anthony. Appreciate the super chat." And I agree. I think it's a great signing. And then Charlie Weiss's last belt loop with a super chat. Thank you, sir, for yours as well. Dabo's a respectful guy, and Notre Dame needs this game. I don't know that I would say Notre Dame needs this game, Trev, but I think it's good for Notre Dame to have this game. I think Notre Dame, if they don't sign this deal, is fine with, not. And I think Clemson, without signing this deal, is fine. I mean, Clemson won. Well, actually, what's ironic is both of the years Clemson won a title, they played Notre Dame. No, actually, they didn't play Notre Dame in 2016. So, no, that's not even true. Clemson doesn't need Notre Dame. Notre Dame doesn't need Clemson, but both benefit from playing each other. But yes, I do believe that there's definitely a level of respect that Dabo Swinney tends to have for Clemson and vice versa. And I still love after Notre Dame beat the mess out of them, there was no excuse making from Dabo. There's no crying about this or that or the other thing. It was like, look, we had a great week of practice. I did not see this coming. They whipped our butts. You know what I mean? And I've always respected that. There was no, our guys weren't used to this. We had some bad breaks. Like, look, man, they whipped our butts, and we had a great week of practice. I didn't see this one coming.
And on the vice versa, when Clemson jumped on Notre Dame in 2023, there was no, this happened at the hotel because it was an away game. And Marcus Freeman walked away. I was like, look, dude, they had 8 starters out. They jumped on us. They were more prepared. We have to do better as a coaching staff.
Yeah.
Those are the rivalries that I like to see.
Since that time, Notre Dame has gone 17-2.
Yeah.
Since that loss to Clemson, Notre Dame has gone 17-2.
Yep.
I think that game triggered something for Marcus Freeman.
I think so too.
I really do.
I think so too. Well, all in all, sounds like group consensus is we like this deal. I'm excited to watch it play out over the next, 12 seasons when it begins.
Starting in 2027.
Yep.
And it's not a given we won't have a game or two between now and then, Trev, especially when you start looking at the preseason top 10 rankings. There's a chance. There's a chance there may be a neutral site game between these two teams this year.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet that they will meet before 2027. But until that point, it'll be something that'll be fun to talk about and look forward to. Listen, folks, we're getting ready to transition over, and we're going to talk about the Notre Dame depth chart, what we believe that it's going to be at the turn of, really the entrance into summer camp. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Now that it's the peak of the offseason, we're kind of getting into the thick of it. The best way to stay in the loop is to subscribe to the premium message boards. You see it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen, boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's where we will have recruiting intel pieces. Conversations like this happen every day, and we've said it multiple times on the show. People in the chat can attest to it. It's a great community over at Irish Breakdown. You can find all of that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, let's talk about Notre Dame specifically. And what we're going to do here over the next two segments is we're going to talk about the Notre Dame depth chart and what we project it to be moving forward. We have an idea of what things are going to be after the spring. We got to see some things unfold. We got some questions answered. So how we're going to do this is we're going to split it into two parts. The first part, we are going to talk about the Notre Dame offense. We're going to go by position group. We're going to talk about why we have it that way. And then we're going to talk about some potential position battles, some obvious, some a little bit more, hey, maybe we're battling for the two deep. Maybe we're talking about a rotation coming to light. And then we're going to do the same thing for the defense. Yeah. So, Brian.
Yeah, so people understand this is not a depth chart that Notre Dame has provided. This is not a depth chart that I'm getting, hey, I talked to my sources and they told me CJ Carr is starting a quarterback. I mean, there are some things we know. There are some things I have gathered from sources that tell me certain things, but this is our view of what we believe the depth chart is going to be this season. It's not even a depth chart of where it is today. Like I know we were doing like the ranking the position groups today, because if it was that, there'd be a couple spots that I would have differently because I would say that they'll probably, I mean, it would not shock me if like, for example, first day of fall camp, the quarterback thing looks a certain way that's built more around seniority than it is necessarily thinking that a certain guy's going to be a certain way. So this is our opinion of what we think the depth chart will be, not what we think we want it to be. So it's not going to be like, okay, Charles Jagasol's at left tackle, and it's not, it's what we honestly believe the depth chart is going to look like. And then there's some spots where we're not sure of actually what it's going to be. And we'll explain that as we get through, like, especially on defense, there's a couple where I'm like, I'm not confident that who's going to start because like of injuries. So Viper will be an interesting conversation because of injuries. I'm not quite sure who the starter is going to be on day one.
Yeah.
And so we'll break all that down. So we're not just going to like list them like, all right, cool. There's the depth chart. Peace out, everybody. We'll actually try to get into and explain why we think things are the way they are and just some brief comments about, you know, the strength of it. But we're not going to talk too much about, like, we'll mention some position battles, but we're not going to take dives into who's got to step up at this position. As Trev said earlier, that's going to be future shows about it. We just wanted to say, this is what we think right now. And I'm kind of excited about this room or, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm ready to get rocking and rolling, Trev. Are you, I don't even know why I asked. Trev's always ready. So let's get going on this, Trev. We're going to start with the offense, as we said, and of course, going to start at quarterback. And I think it's always a fun place to start for a couple former quarterbacks.
Well, it sure is. And like I said, some position battles are going to be a little bit more obvious to talk about than some others. Starting with the quarterback room, moving into summer workouts. Order of the depth chart, and we've talked about it. We've been open about it on the show. We believe that CJ Carr is going to end up winning the job. But not to discount number 8, listed second on the depth chart. Kenny Minshew is very much still in this competition. So at the top, those are two players that is going to catch a lot of our attention this offseason. Now, With this being said, this is what the quarterback depth chart we project it to be now. I just saw somebody bring it up in the chat. Go ahead.
With one exception, we are not projecting position moves that haven't happened yet. So if a position moves happen, and we anticipate Tyler Buckner moving to quarterback, but as of right now, that hasn't happened. So until that officially happens, and again, I fully expect it to happen, we're kind of going with where they are now.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep that in mind, that's going to factor into it, which is why we only have these 4 for now.
So we talked through why we have it formatted the way that we do. For me, and it was funny, Brian put this together. He sent me over the link, and he's like, hey, what do you think of this depth chart? And I was like, I know this isn't going to shock you. We have the exact same depth chart, verbatim listed players in order. Now, I built mine, and I'm sure that Brian did it in a similar light of a lot of things that we got to see in the spring. We've talked about it before in the show. CJ Carr was the most consistent quarterback that we saw in the spring, which led him to being atop of this depth chart that Irish Breakdown put together. You know, the other one in there for me that I wanted to touch on real quickly was Blake Hebert being third. I know he's the true freshman in the room. Anthony Rizak has already been there, but I formulate depth charts by, okay, if players, you know, if worst case scenario happens and the roster starts dropping like flies due to injury, who would then be the next person in? For me, that person was Blake Hebert because of what it means down the road. So
it's not just about okay, this guy is a scholarship player and this guy isn't. It's truly about like where are they going to go? Who's going to play?
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of factors into it in this conversation. Like, for example, there's a walk-on that I have ahead of some freshmen at defensive end. I have Kobe Onyuke ahead of some freshmen because I think he's a guy that they would have no problem putting in certain situations if the need was there, if they were trying to preserve a red shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So, look, for me, Trev, it really comes down to, yes, there's a quarterback battle.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat said, if you wanted to be PC, you'd put a 1A, 1B. There's nothing about me that's PC. This is about giving you my honest opinion of what's going to happen, what I think is going to happen. In my center saying like, hey guys, bet your mortgage on CJ Carr starting at quarterback. No, because I'm not betting against Kenny Minchie. But to your point, Trev, everything we've seen so far makes us think that CJ Carr is ahead of where Kenny Minchie is. When the younger player is, in our opinion, already ahead of an older player, it's not often that older player all of a sudden rallies and comes back and passes the younger player. I also think that CJ Carr overall is the better talent. And as I've said many times, if Kenny Minchie beats out CJ Carr, I'm even more excited about the quarterback room.
Yeah.
And it's not because I think ultimately Kenny Minchie has the higher ceiling. It's for Kenny to beat out CJ, he has to be really, really good. And if that were to happen, then that tells me that he's going to go out there this fall and be really, really good. And this reality right here is why I'm very optimistic about the quarterback play this season. I'm not saying that either one of these guys are going to go out there and be a top 5 Heisman finalist.
Sure.
But as far as playing at a level that allows this team to go out there and compete for championship, I think they're both capable of it. I just think CJ's the better player right now. But this is one where I absolutely think in fall camp, both of these young men will get reps with the first team and deserve reps with the first team and then let the best man win. We think when the dust settles, it's going to be CJ Carr. But this is one of those ones where I'm not team CJ. I'm not team Kenny. I'm like, dude, they can both play. But I didn't want to be soft and say, well, let's go 1A, 1B so we don't tick off the pro CJ or pro Kenny people. This is our opinion. But I'm at the point now where I don't care if Kenny wins a job. I'm at the point now where the only guy that would make me nervous about winning starting job and lowering the ceiling of this team is not on the roster anymore. I've said all along, I think CJ's a better player, but if Kenny beats him out, let's roll. Because they're both very talented young men, and that's where we're at. And Blake Hebert is an extremely talented young man as well. There's some throws he made this spring where you're just like, even in the blue gold game during the 7-on-7 portion, you're like, that guy's got some talent.
Yep.
And that's your third stringer. And yeah, it's an impressive group.
Oh yeah. When I look at depth charts, man, especially near the top, a lot of the conversation comes down to readiness. And again, it just falls in line with what we talked about from what we've seen this spring, man. The CJ Carr just seems and looks to be the most ready as of the blue gold game on April 12th. That's the last time I got
mean,
to
and
see
I
them
think
in
it'll
person.
be true. I mean, look, he was
Yeah.
he was better last spring. He was better, in prior to the injury. He was better in fall camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree.
I don't need to put any qualifiers on it. I just think he's been the better player so far. I'm simply saying if Kenny rebounds and proves to be better in the fall, then you're going to have one heck of a quarterback.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's where I'm at on this one.
I'm with you.
Let's go to running back. Just a nutty room.
Legitimately, this is one of those rooms that you look at. I don't even know where to start, man. I mean, look, the depth chart at the top, understandably, this is the order of what it's in. Jeremiah Love, J.D. Price, and Aeneas Williams were your three leading backs last season. They sit at the top of the depth chart. Kedron Young, he was up and coming. He had a really, really good spring. And honestly, I'm happy with what I saw from Jabron Payne as well. Some questions surrounding him coming back from his knee injury. Was he still going to have the same cutting ability?
He looked quicker.
He did.
I thought he looked quicker.
I thought so too. And so he might be filed into that minority category of players that like physically look better than where they were. It's a very small group. But man,
I can talk about this now because the portal's closed, but I was shocked Jabron Payne didn't jump in the portal.
Me too.
There was another running back we were told was going to jump in the portal, but I just fully expected Jabron Payne to jump in the portal, not because he's afraid of competition, but I'm like, if you watched him this spring, especially when you look at just the lack of impressive running backs that are on there, I'm like, if I'm a Big Ten team, I'm trying like crazy to convince Jabron Payne to jump in the portal. Please jump in the portal because you can start for us. And the fact that he didn't says a lot about this room. Number one is, it's going to be Jeremiah Love. I don't think number two is up for debate either. And I think the spring answered any questions that some people might have about somebody else passing Jadarian Price. Barring injury, Jadarian's going to be on there. I'm watching Greg McElroy yesterday do a video. Somebody put his video on the board where he's ranking the top 10 running backs. And then he does like his honorable mention guys. He's talking about Jadarian Price. And he's like, if not for Jeremiah Love, this guy's in the top 10. And I think he's absolutely spot on. Like they have two top 10 running backs in college football right now. Yeah. And Jadarian is one of those two. With all due respect to Kedron and Aeneas, who everybody wants to say, he's going to push Jadarian Price. We watched a different guy play this season. And that's nothing against Aeneas Williams, who's a good football player. But he's not Jadarian Price. And so I think those two are settled. The question now becomes, what's the rotation after that? Will Jawan Sider do a third down back the same way that Thielen McCullough did? Or are they going to try to get Jeremiah Love more into that role and Jadarian Price more into that role? Jadarian's going to have to improve a lot as a pass blocker if he's going to be in there in that situation. Yeah. Does Kedron Young push Aeneas Williams for that role? Does Jabron Payne push his way back into that role? Because remember, that role belonged to Jabron Payne a year ago before the injury, a little over a year ago before he got injured in the blue gold game. And like Trev, you and I have talked about before, if Nolan James keeps developing, he's not going to be stuck on the bottom of this depth chart all year. Like, that kid's a good football player. And he's one of those guys where you're like, you better not get hurt and miss a chunk of time because you may not have a job back. And that's true for everybody on this list, top to bottom. You better not miss some time because when you come back, you may not have your job anymore. And so I think this unit is outstanding. Look, Trev, I genuinely believe this. With the offensive line Notre Dame should have next year, I truly believe if any of these top 6 players was forced to be the every down back, they're 1,000-yard rushers in the regular season next year.
Agreed.
If they were forced to have 70% of the carries next year because of injuries and whatever else, they're all talented 1,000-yard players. And I don't mean eventually. I'm talking about in 2025, any of these 6 kids, if they were made the starter, could rush for 1,000 yards. Now, within that 1,000, it's going to be different type of 1,000. Some guys grind out 1,000. Some guys make 1,000 on way less carries because they're so dynamic and so special. Some guys do more. Some guys do this. But all 6 of those young men are starting caliber football players.
Oh, yeah.
And you're going to have some tough decisions to make. But I think one of the more intense and interesting battles in fall camp is going to be the battle between this one right here, right? It's going to be these guys right here in fall camp. Like, that's the battle that I'm very curious to see how that plays out in fall camp. This is what it is right now, but I would write 3 to 6. I'd be writing in pencil. That's what I would do. So that's going to be a very interesting conversation, Trevor. Very interesting conversation to see how that shakes out in fall camp. It's a loaded room. There's not a better room, because you could argue that Penn State's 1-2 is as good as Notre Dame's 1-2. And honestly, I wouldn't spend a lot of time arguing with you about it. People are going to say, well, if CJ Baxter's back to full speed, maybe Texas is like, okay, I think you're nuts, but like it's fine. It's a really good 1-2 group. Louisville's going to have a good 1-2. I mean, there are other teams with really good 1-2 punches that you could say, okay, it's in the same ballpark. And there's even some teams with a good third. But there's nobody in college football that can go 6 deep the way that this group can. Nobody. And I don't think it's close. And that's what makes this room really special. But this is how I see that it's shaken out right now, depth chart wise. But I think there's going to be a very intense battle between, especially 3 to 5, the veterans. I think there's going to be a very intense battle.
I think this is the best running back room in college football. And I don't really think there's much room for debate there. In addition to the position battle, I'm just interested to see what their usage is going to be, man. Do Jabron Payne and Aeneas split third down reps like what Aeneas and Devin Ford did to start the season? Does Kedron step into that short yardage role?
And I think we should not dismiss him in third down either, especially after what we saw in the Blue Gold game.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. It's just going to be – I can't wait to see what 3 through 6 brings. It's just crazy to look at a back like Nolan James and see him 6th on the depth chart.
What does it say about Nolan James that he looked at this depth chart and said, yeah, I'm going to go there? What does it say about that young man's competitiveness that he saw this depth chart and said, yes, I want to compete against that? Like, I got a lot of respect for that kid. He could have gone to BC and played as a freshman.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, I want to go to Notre Dame because I have something bigger in mind. I think that just speaks volumes about him. Volumes about his competitiveness. And that's one of the things I love. He's like one of my favorite, like, okay, there's something about this kid. I'm very curious to see what he's going to turn into because, that's going to be interesting. Mm-hmm. Let's head over to wide receiver, Trev. So we've broken this one down into the X receiver is the boundary receiver. That is a position that Bo Collins played last year. The slot receiver is, that's an obvious one. It's the slot receiver. It's where Jaden Greathouse played. And then the Z receiver is the field outside position, flanker position. It's the position that Jordan Faison and Chris Mitchell played last season. So that's kind of just so people understand. One thing to keep in mind about this, and this is something that I have been told by multiple people around the program, is that, yes, they're going to have to kind of be on a paper depth chart, but there's a lot of guys at this position that they plan on moving around a little bit. They are not saying, hey, Will Pauling, you just learned the slot plays. Hey, Jordan Faison and KK Smith, you just learned Z. Even Malachi Fields, hey, you just learned boundary. They do want to move guys around in a lot of different ways, but it's hard to represent that on a paper or like aesthetic depth chart. So just keep that in mind. Just because we have Cam Williams where we have him at X doesn't mean that he may not be pushing at Z. And just because we have Will Pauling where he is in the slot doesn't mean he may not push at Z or and different aspects of it. Doesn't mean that there may not be times where we don't see Jaden Greathouse in the boundary. We may see that. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at this depth chart, that there is a lot of positional flexibility within this, but this is where we think will be the base where you kind of line up day one expectation for this. And part of this is where guys were in the spring, going back and looking at that and where we expect some guys to kind of project. But Trev, I got to tell you, man, when you see this group on paper, it's hard not to get excited about this receiver room because you do have everybody back. You think about this for the spring game. Everybody's like, oh, receivers still big question mark. Okay. You did not see Jordan Faison in the spring. You did not see Malachi Fields in the spring. You did not see Micah Gilbert in the spring. And we got a 50-50 version or a 50% version of Jaden Greathouse just because how much they played him. And Will Pauling wasn't 100% yet. you start looking at it on paper, Trev, and you start getting a little bit fired up, especially after the spring that Elijah Burris had, for example. And man, this is going to be a fun room. Look, Leo Schuyler's is not much different than guys like Robbie Toma and Chris Fink we've seen in the past that played a lot for Notre Dame. I like Robbie Toma, I do, but I think Leo Schuyler's probably a better wide receiver than what Robbie Toma was. But and that's not at all a shot on Robbie Toma. I mean, I'm watching highlights of the 2012 season the other day. Somebody put a video on our board, and Robbie Toma's a good football player. This is not at all meant to be a shot at Robbie Toma. This is meant to be a praise of Leo Schuyler. That in past years, that guy's cracking your two deep at receiver at Notre Dame. And now he's buried on that depth chart. And if not for how well Elijah Burris played this spring, I probably would have put Leo third. But Elijah, I think, proved himself this spring without question. It's an impressive room.
Elijah Burris is the one player that I'm going to be very interested to see where he ends up on the final, well, not the final, but the fall depth chart going into week one. He took probably the biggest step for me in the spring that I saw, going from a player that's like, I just don't think he's going to play that much. Like, dude, he might play in meaningful minutes in the season, early in the season potentially, because the pecking order at Z is interesting. You know, you go and you look and it's like, okay, Will Pauling, for his skill set and what he brings to the table, he's not just going to your point, Brian, is not just going to stay buried at the number 2 spot at slot receiver. Jordan Faison, first and foremost, stay healthy. But I also have him slotted as the starting Z receiver because he's one of the returning starters from last season. But the pecking order behind Faison, to me, comes down to a couple of people, really 4. Will Pauling, KK Smith, Cam Williams, and Elijah Burris. That one is going to be interesting to watch how that unfolds over camp. KK Smith, I'm still holding out to see if he can make that jump, but he's going into his junior year of college, and if not, he's running into that territory. It's like, dude, behind you have a lot of talent, especially with the emergence of Elijah Burris in spring. What is that going to look like? You know, Cam Williams, if he can put it together, he's not just going to stay at third on this depth chart at X receiver. He's going to start rotating it at Z. Brian, out of all 3 of these, between the X, the slot, and the Z, would you say that the Z receiver will have the most rotation amongst the 3 positions?
Yeah, I do, because I think you're going to see more guys. I don't know that it's going to be more of a rotation if they're going to use more than 2. I don't think that's a given. I don't think it's a given I don't think it's a given that if it is a 2-man rotation, that it'll be the 2 listed on the depth chart. I could see a scenario where if KK and Elijah aren't quite on the same level as Greathouse, Faison, and Pauling, that those 2 positions could be a combination of those 3. I think what we're going to see this fall, Trev, is Greathouse, Pauling, and Faison all at different times playing outside.
Yeah.
At that position. Now, KK and Elijah have to take their game to another level to get in the road. It's great that they did what they did in the spring, especially Elijah, but it's not, okay, now they're going to get equal reps to one of those 3.
Sure.
I think right now it's a 3-man rotation to the field. It's also, if Cam Williams has a really good fall camp and Micah Gilbert comes back to full speed, they're not all 3 going to stay in the boundary with Malachi Fields. You could see one of them, and I think it's most likely Cam, get shifted out to Z and play there. Because a part of the reason Cam played so much in the boundary in the fall, in the spring, is because the top 2 guys weren't there. And there was really nobody else that really fits there.
Yeah.
So if those 2 guys, if Malachi Fields shows up and he's what we think he's going to be, and Micah Gilbert gets back to health and looks like the player that he was last spring, then I think you could also see Cam Williams, if he has a good fall camp, moving over there and maybe slotting in ahead of KK and Elijah. It's not a given. I'm just saying that's an example of some movement we could see. But if you were to ask me right now, what I think the rotation will look like going into Miami, I think it's going to be a 3-man rotation with Greathouse, Faison, and Pauling, and then Fields and Gilbert into the boundary. I think that's what it would look like with a shot for a 6th guy to jump in. I'd still put KK Smith as having the best opportunity for that, but I think Cam Williams is right there. I think Elijah Burris is right there. I think those 2 guys are battling. Pardon me. Those 3 guys will battle to get that number 6 spot. They don't need to play 6. They can get away with 5 and be just fine because of that positional flexibility that those 3 guys to the field have in Greathouse, Pauling, and Faison.
Love that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm also really excited to watch Will Pauling for an entire remainder of the offseason at 100%, because he remains the dark horse for me. And when I mean dark horse, I mean to say there's a lot of attention going to Malachi Fields, a lot of attention going to Jaden Greathouse, rightfully so. We've talked a lot about the younger guys, but then there's kind of that group of players in between that get a little bit overshadowed from time to time. The Will Paulings, the KK Smiths, and those are guys for me that if they can break out.
Like an example would be Trev, and I'm doing this on purpose to take a little shot at one of my guys in the chat who I'm taking a friendly shot at. But if Will Pauling can look like the guy that in 2023 in a bowl game caught 8 passes for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns against L for loser SU, then Notre Dame's going to have quite a group of receivers.
Yep.
I had to get you big. I'm sorry, man. But yeah, Will Pauling's a guy that had 8 catches for 143 yards and 2 touchdowns in a bowl game against LSU. Well, Brian Kelly might still be having nightmares about Will Pauling. But no, I'm just kind of messing around, Trev. But yeah, but I want to see that guy healthy. I want to see him, because last year he wasn't that guy. He was banged up all year, and their quarterback position was a hot mess. Mm-hmm. If that guy can be a little bit more prominent, then oh boy, it's going to be a fun year.
Sure is. It sure is.
All right, let's move to tight end.
Tight end position. This one we've talked a lot about this offseason so far. Well, at least I have. And it's and Eli Raridon sits up at the top. He made really big strides this spring. And when I mean big strides, I don't mean is somebody going to come in and dethrone him if he doesn't. But we needed to see Eli Raridon be able to handle almost the mantra of being tight end 1 at Notre Dame. And I think he took it and ran with it, literally and figuratively, in the spring. Saw a lot of good things from him as a pass catcher and as a run blocker. Saw really good things from Kevin Bauman. Because I'm not going to lie, going into March, like when I leave in the month of February, I was kind of just looking at Kevin Bauman. I was like, yeah, he's a 6-year guy. He's been injured for the majority of his time at Notre Dame. We'll see what that looks like. And Kevin Bauman is, I mean, he showed that he can be an effective member of the offense throughout the spring for me. Where I'm going to be really paying attention, especially in the summer and fall camp, is going to be what happens from Jack Larson to James Flanagan. That, to me, is going to be a really interesting dynamic to watch as the summer and fall unfolds, because the role of Ty Washington, we don't really know what that's going to be yet. James Flanagan comes in as one of your higher-rated tight end prospects that's came in quite some time.
Well, yeah, since Eli.
Yeah.
In the 20, Eli would have been 22, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had James. Eli has had a higher ceiling. James was the better player coming out of high school.
Good deal.
Yeah.
Good deal.
To your point, like that's.
Yeah.
And then before that, it's Michael Mayer back in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's in that cat. He's a top 100 recruit coming in. Yes. And he's been that, but that's the thing, Trev. Look at his size though. He's not a kid that, boy, he's going to need some time in the weight room. I mean, James Flanagan, it would not shock me. He was listed as 6'5", 230 when he signed.
Yeah.
It wouldn't shock me if he's 240-ish or more when he shows up.
Absolutely. He's one of those guys where it's like, how long can you keep a kid like James Flanagan off the field, especially in a tight end room that looks the way that it does right now? If Notre Dame still had Cooper Flanagan and he wasn't suffering from his injury, I could see a scenario. It's like, okay, with James Flanagan, how much do you play him as a freshman? You probably still get him on the field.
He's not a 5-year guy to me. But,
Agreed.
But you don't need him to play as a freshman. He'd have to earn it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference, Trev. where I think you need him to get ready to play this year. What's interesting about this group, Trev, is to your point about Eli Raridon, I get what you're trying to say. It's not about is Eli going to start or not. That's not the debate. What we need to see from Eli Raridon is he going to get to the point where he now starts looking like an impact player, a difference maker? That's what the question with Eli Raridon is, not will he start. Kevin Bauman's another interesting guy too, Trev, because if he looks anything like he did in 2022, this guy can play for you. I mean, go look at the catch he made against Ohio State to set up, I think it was their touchdown drive. That seam route that was like way behind him. He had to turn around and make a great catch on it.
Yeah.
That kid can play if he's healthy. It's just have all the injuries sapped him of that talent. Well, I thought yes. And honestly, kind of what we saw in spring practices was kind of like, he's just not that guy anymore. And he looks like RoboCop. I made this joke out there because he's got like all these different like pads on his arms and his legs. And it's like you're piecing that poor kid together. But then he goes out in the blue gold game. Maybe it's because there's a little bit extra adrenaline going. And he's, some guys are just, people say, well, how can some guys be gamers? Well, some guys just can't replicate the adrenaline that they get on game day. And I've talked about this. I had a receiver one time at Duquesne who he was good in practice, but he wasn't special in practice, but he was special on Saturdays. Every time we finish a drill, he's over there getting stretched out by the trainers because he just couldn't get loose in practice. Never had that issue in games because the adrenaline and just got the blood flowing, and he was great. Hopefully that's Kevin Bauman.
Yeah.
Where he moved so much quicker in the blue gold game than he did in the practices. Maybe also because it was early in the morning. You get the older you get, man. And Kev's up there. He's getting up there in age, man. You know what I mean? Maybe he's just not a morning person anymore. So those 9 a.m. practices weren't. But if he can play like he did in the blue gold game, and if Jack Larson can play like he did in the blue gold game, right there, you're good. You're solid at tight end. Yeah. Then anything you get out of Ty Washington and James Flanagan is just like a little extra something. The problem is the first two guys on that list above are guys that have had injury problems. And the number 3 guy on the list has never played a meaningful down of football yet. That's actually incorrect. That should say sophomore freshman for Jack Larson. So that is one mistake that I made, but the eligibility is correct. And I'll fix that on the depth chart that I put on the website.
Good deal.
I should have had somebody look over that and check that for me and make sure I wasn't doing anything wrong.
Should have. Make a note of that for next time, buddy.
I kind of feel like I might have actually done that. I don't remember.
Might have.
Who remembers such things?
I don't know. I'll talk to Vince after the show. I'll make sure it's stored up.
Let's move over to the offensive line, Trev.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one because this is another one that you have to keep in mind. There's going to be some movement. There's going to be some kind of like Sullivan Absher could be listed at 3 different positions here. And I didn't want to do that. I mean, I could have done that, but I just didn't want to because I wanted to kind of have everybody be at one spot. I think I don't even know if I did that at any positions. I just kind of put people in one spot, but just because it's a paper depth chart. But in reality, Sullivan Absher can play at 4 spots. He can play at left guard. He can play center. He can play right guard. He can play right tackle. The other question I have is who goes in at left tackle if Anthony Knapp goes down? Mm-hmm. Is it Charles Jagasaw? Is it Gerby Lambert? We have seen Sullivan Absher play left tackle when Notre Dame played Oregon State in the Sun Bowl. When they put in their second-team offensive line, it was Sullivan Absher that went in at left tackle. He has literally lined up in practice or a game or a scrimmage at all 5 positions on the offensive line at Notre Dame. Now, part of that's impressive. Part of that is, will you please let that kid learn one position so he can have a chance to become the best version of himself? For the love of all things holy, can you please let him be that? But, different conversation for a different day. But I'm comfortable with where it is right now. As far as on paper, Max Anderson's another player that could play center. He could play tackle. We've seen him play multiple positions. We saw Max get some work at center early in spring practice, but he's also played guard, so we could see some movement there. Gerby Lambert's a guy that I was told could get some work at left tackle, potentially in the spring. I think Styles Prescott, you talk about players taking advantage of other people being out. I think Styles Prescott opened up some people's eyes in spring practice with Anthony Knapp out, with Charles Jagasaw playing right guard. That meant a lot more reps for Styles Prescott. He showed that he still has work to do, but he showed he's got tools. He's got some stuff to work with. He had a really good spring to the point where it's not a given that if Anthony Knapp goes down for a series that they would move somebody else over. It's not a given. It may still happen, but it's not a given. So that's what I think the offensive depth chart looks like. And when you've got a guy like Will Black there at number 4, a lot of that's just because he hasn't played yet and hasn't got here yet. I do expect him to relatively quickly move up. Matty Augustine's another one. He's not locked in at left tackle. If he's performing well and Will Black's performing well, I think he could play guard. I think that Owen Strebe could play guard at some point in time. You could see them maybe battle at right tackle. There's a lot of positional flexibility in not just right to left, but tackle to guard with this team that has to be kept in mind when looking at this depth chart.
I know they're all young, to 3 sophomores, 2 freshmen. It is shocking to see a Notre Dame depth chart at left tackle with not a single 300-pounder.
Yeah, well, now.
That's my point. They're young.
This is what Will Black was listed at when he signed.
Yeah.
I have a feeling he's going to be a lot bigger than 295. But yes, agreed. I get your point. I agree with that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That is interesting. Would you say out of this whole list, Will Black has the opportunity to move up the highest?
Yes. I mean, I don't see Owen Strebe going up 2 spots. I don't see, Cam Herron going up 2 spots, because a lot of that would be they'd have to start. I mean, if Devin Houston, Chris Tarrick, Owen Strebe, Gerby Lambert, Joe Otting, Cam Herron, Sullivan Abser, Peter Jones move up 2 spots, they're starting.
Yeah.
If Will Black moves up 2 spots, he's the backup still. So I just think by nature, I think so. On top of that, just by the sheer numbers. But the other part of that, Trev, to your point, is he's also, along with Jagasol and Gerby Lambert, probably the highest upside, highest ceiling type of guy too. So I'll be shocked if we get to the end of the season and we still look at the depth chart this way. Really shocked.
Agreed.
Really shocked.
I agree.
You also look at this, Trev, and you're thinking, boy, there's a lot of talent in this room. I wish we could have seen Christopher Tarrick during the spring, because he was really good last year in the Blue Gold game. And he was very, in the limited snaps he played this season. Go watch, for example, I think it was the Stanford game when Christopher Tarrick got in. That kid can play, Trev. That's a good football player. And, and I was shocked at how quickly, and part of this is a testament to Devin Houston. You got to give him credit for this. Part of it also is a testament to Joe Rudolph, how quickly Devin Houston looked comfortable playing the offensive line. Now, when I go watch the Blue Gold game and do it when I rewatch the game, which I've done 6 or 7 times now, do I say, boy, if you had to play a game tomorrow, Devin Houston's ready to play for you right now against Alabama? No, I'm not saying that. But he looked like a college offensive lineman in 15 practices. Not even, because by the time we got to the Blue Gold game, there were still basically 4 or 5 practices left, 3 or 4 practices left. So not even full 15. Devin Houston looked like a kid that can help you someday. And so that's a testament to him having the right attitude, putting the work in. But I also think that's a testament to the job that Drew Rudolph did helping him with that transition. So, props to both of them to get him going. But I'll say this, if you did not know that Devin Houston came to Notre Dame as a D tackle and spent his first 2 years on campus playing D tackle, the first time you ever saw Notre Dame play or practice in any shape, form, or fashion was this spring, you would never have guessed that Devin Houston was a defensive lineman.
Sure. I would agree with that completely. Would absolutely agree with that. Another promising thing is every single player that's listed on this has the opportunity to come back next year. Every single player, from starter down to 5th string, has the opportunity or has to come back next year, eligibility-wise. Not saying that people won't transfer or do whatever they got to do, but on paper right now, every single one of these guys has the opportunity to come back.
Yep.
And that is crazy.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
You could have a scenario where you have a couple starters depending on how certain things shake out, but you're guaranteed at least one starter has to come back unless he wants to transfer somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Have to come back to college football.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and look, just the raw talent. Somebody in the chat said it. If this is not a Joe Moore Award finalist, you have to win it. That's setting a standard so high that you're almost like you want them to fail. But if this group's not in the final group at the end of the year, there's a problem.
Yeah,
there's a problem. Either with the strength conditioning program because a bunch of dudes get hurt, or something else. But like, there's way too much talent. And most of these guys are below what they will weigh in the fall. Like Billy Schrouth's always down in the spring compared to what he is in the fall. Charles Jagasaw is always down in the spring compared to where he's in the fall. I fully expect Anthony Knapp to be at least 3, 4, 5 pounds heavier. I expect Emil to be 4 or 5 pounds heavier. And Emil didn't look 293 in spring.
Sure didn't.
Like, he looked bigger than he was in the fall. A lot thicker than he was in the fall in the upper body. And I mean good weight. Like his arms looked a lot bigger. His chest, like, because we got to see Emil without pads on at a couple practices because he was kind of just going through drills. And I walked right past him at one point in time. And because he was working on pass sets and he was kind of off the side and I'm going outside to watch the lineman practice. I mean, I'm literally bumped shoulders almost with him. And you could just see him compared to where he was a year ago. And you're like, he's filling out upper body. Now, he's still got to fill out the lower body. That's still the big question with Emil. But that upper body's impressive looking. So I was surprised he was still listed at 293.
Yep.
But I expect at least on average for this group to have a minimum 4 or 5 pounds additional on average of the starting lineup when we get to the spring. Like Joe Otting was over 300 pounds in the fall. He was down. I mean, most of these guys were down a little bit from where they were in the fall. Not everybody. Gerby Lambert was way up from where he was in the fall. But everybody else was down a little bit or right where they were for the most part. So it's going to end up being a much bigger offensive line than it looks. So, yeah. And somebody asked how many Joe Moore Award finalists are there? I believe it's 3.
3.
Yeah.
Yep.
It
3.
It better be.
There are some good offensive lines in terms of experience on paper coming back in college football this year, I will say.
Yeah, but Notre Dame shouldn't. I mean, your left tackle, your left guard, your right tackle, all are returning starters from last season. Your right guard started in the national title game and played in the semifinal game, and your center has 6 career starts as well.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
They're not like a bunch of 40-game starters, but like you went into last season and your first game of the year, you had 6 combined starts in your starting lineup. 6. That's it. Because you had Rocco and Coogan on the bench. Knapp had 0. Pendleton had 0. Emil Wagner had 0. And Schrouth and Craig both had 3. Now, Craig alone has 6. Jagasaw only has 2. Knapp has 15. Schrouth now has, what's he at? He's at 15 because he missed, 4 games last year?
Yeah,
correct?
He started 12 games last year.
And then he started 3 the year before. He's got a full season. Wagner's got 16. So it's still not like what it was a couple years ago. Remember? Because you had you coming into the year and Knapp's got almost 30 career starts and Blake's got almost 30 career starts and or what, even 2022, it was even, you had Patterson had a bunch of starts. It was a much busier year for sure.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree completely. I was saying, that's how impressive this is for me, is the fact that there's offensive lines out there like Texas A&M's and Penn State's who return 4 of their 5 or 5 of their 5 starters. And we can confidently say that this should be a Joe Moore Award finalist offensive line, especially because the combination of the starting left to right have not all played together yet. Now, I think that just speaks volumes to the level of talent that's in this room. So I agree completely. It's going to should be a fun season to watch this group.
Yeah,
so.
No doubt. A lot and you see this throughout the depth chart, Trevor. Just my own rankings. The guy I have projected to be number 1 was a 5-star player with 5-star upside. The guy that I have number 1 at running back was a 4.5-star kid that was at the time top 50 with 5-star upside. My number 2 running back was a top 100 recruit. My number 3 here was a top 150 guy. My number 4 guy was a top 100 guy. My number 5 guy was a top 250 guy. And my number 6 guy was a top 150 guy. Receiver, I didn't grade Malachi Fields coming out, but he's a dude. Micah Gilbert was a top 150 guy. Cam Williams is a 5-star. this is my grading scale. Jaden Greathouse, a top 100 player. I didn't grade Will Pauling, but again, he's a guy with over 1,000 career yards. Logan Saldate was a 4-star. Scrap was a 4-star just on athleticism alone. Didn't grade Jordan Faison. KK Smith was a 4-star. Elijah Burris was a 4-star. Tight end, Eli Raridan was a top 100 player with 5-star upside. Kevin Bauman was a top 250 player. Jack Larson was a top 250 player. James Flanagan's a top 100 player. Offensive line, Knapp, he had one of my lower grades of the starting lineup, and current grade, he was a 3.5-star, but he had 4.5-star upside, which at the time was a top 50 player. It was always about, can he hold up with that size? We praise his athleticism, his power, all those type of tools, but it was the size part. Could he, and where was he going to play? Billy Schrouth was a top 100 player. Ashton Craig was a top 250 player. Jagasaw was a 5-star player. Wagner was a guy that I had graded as a top 100 guy, I believe, maybe 150, but I think 100, but 5-star upside. It was always about, could he handle the weight? Gerby was a 5-star player. Strebig's a top 250 player. Christopher Tarrick was a guy that I had, a 4-star upside to. Joe Wadding was a 4-star player, top 250 guy. Sylvan Absher was a top 150 guy coming out of high school. Peter Jones was a top 250 guy coming out of high school. Styles Prescott was a top 250 guy. Matty Augustine was a top 250 guy. Will Black was a 5-star guy. Like, this is a lot of talent. And I'm going to say about the offense, Trev, sort of what I said about the team last year, is we're going to find out if Notre Dame and I are good at evaluating players. Because your roster's now almost exclusively made of guys you've recruited. You're not coaching Brian Kelly players anymore. You're recruiting, you're going into year 4. There's not a lot of 5th and 6th year guys on this team. There just isn't. I think Kevin Bauman's really the only guy that has played a down under Brian Kelly, correct? So if you go to quarterback, none at quarterback, none of the running backs, none of the receivers, because Will Pauling and Malachi weren't here. Because if you're not a 5th-year senior, you never played for Brian Kelly. If you're going into your senior year, you've only played for Marcus Freeman. So Raridan, Kevin Bauman's the only one on offense, the only guy that played under Brian Kelly on offense. Tyler Buckner, that's it. But of the current scholarship guys, Tyler Buckner's the only other one. That's it. So you're going to find out real quick, Trev, if this group knows how to evaluate by how well this offense plays this year, because the talent on paper looks really, really good.
And why we continually say that this isn't a fluky type of deal. And it's not a now or never type situation. Is on offense, all the players that you listed off, I think 5 of them have to leave. Eli Raridan, Kevin Bauman, Jake Tefelsky was on there.
Yeah.
Tyler Buckner's a 5th year, but I think he still has another year of eligibility after this year, I think.
Possible. No. Because I think he took a red shirt at Bama. No, his Notre Dame. No, I don't know that he does. I don't think he has a 6th year, but
he doesn't. Okay.
Potentially. But he's no longer a scholarship player, and he's more of a lacrosse guy than anything. Leo Schuyler is out. Kevin Bauman, Eli Raridan, and none of the offensive linemen. So there's not a lot of guys who can't come back. Now we don't expect Jeremiah Love back.
No,
I don't know that Jadarian's going to come back.
Malachi,
but those guys aren't coming back for good reason.
Right.
They're not coming back because they had great years and they're part of a great team. If Charles Jagasaw doesn't come back, it's because he has a monster season and Notre Dame's really, really flipping good. If Emil Wagner doesn't come back, it's likely for the same reason, or he realizes he's not going to still be above so-and-so or so-and-so. It's one of those two reasons is why he may choose not to come back. So same thing with Billy Schrouth. If he chooses not to come back, why? It's because he gets graded out as a day 1 or early day 2 pick and he's going to go pro. So there's a lot of talent coming back. It's young in certain spots, but it's a lot of talent, a whole lot of talent.
Well, that's going to do it for the offensive depth chart breakdown that we had put together. We're getting ready to transition over to the defensive side. It's going to be formatted the same. But before we get there, folks, please be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends or family, whatever platform that you listen to this on. We'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, we are going to wrap up the depth chart section. We'll talk about the defense. And we're going to do the same that we did on offense. We're going to go by position. If my memory serves me well, we're going to do, five different positions: DNs, defensive tackles, linebackers, corners, safeties.
And then nickels will be with the corners.
Good deal. Good deal. We're going to start with the ends. As you guys can see, we have it split up into Vipers and defensive ends. Brian, I'll pass it over to you. When you started putting together the Viper position, because I know you said at the start of the segment, health could dictate what this looks like. So when you started building this out, what does this look like for you?
This is the one I was talking about before when we first started. This is the one that I'm like, I have no clue what it's going to look like. The defensive end position is another interesting one, Trev, just briefly, because I don't think it matters who starts between Josh Burnham and Bryce Young. They're both going to play a ton. And I don't really care who takes the first snap. They're both going to play and be counted on. But at that Viper position, I have no clue what the rotation is going to look like. I don't know who's going to start, because so what I decided to go with is to go with what the depth chart was when everyone was healthy last year. And when everyone was healthy last year, it looked like this. It was Botelho 1, Boubacar Traore 2, Junior Tuilamaka 3, and Logan Thomas 4. I would not discount Junior Tuilamaka with how healthy he's been and the fact that he performed as well as he did last season. I would not discount him from being number 1. I could see him being number 2. So this is just simply about kind of almost going with what it was before the injuries and with the uncertainty of what guys are going to look like. I could see Jordan Botelho being 3rd. I could see him being 2nd. I could see Boubacar being 1. I could see Boubacar being 2. I could see Boubacar being a pass rush specialist. It just, so much of this depends on health. And I thought about putting Junior, and looking back, I think I might put Junior 1 when I do my print edition of this depth chart, just because that's the dude that answered the bell last year. That's the guy that stayed healthy. That's the guy that was able to kind of step up every week and whenever he was asked about to perform. But I felt almost as if that was a little disrespectful to Jordan and Traore, because it's not like they punked out. You know, they didn't have I had a hamstring injury and I just, my agent told me to sit there. They had devastating knee injuries. And we're both playing very well when they went down. And that's what made it so challenging, Trev, is because Junior stepped in and performed quite admirably. But it's not like Botelho and Boubacar were playing football when they went down. They were playing really good football. And technically, Junior wasn't even the starter last year at Viper. Burnham was. So, because when those two guys went down, they moved Burnham over to Viper, and he started most of the games at Viper, and then RJ Oben and Bryce Young handled the defensive end position. So, it was challenging to put it together. What you realize, though, Trev, is it's a talented group. That's the key thing, is you look at these guys, let's say that there's an injury at Viper, and you've got to move Burnham back over there. Well, with the way Cole Mullins performed this spring, and then you've got Christopher Burgess stepping in. Kobe Onyuke is a guy that the staff loves as a player. He's a quality athlete, as a guy that could get you out of a ball game if you needed him to. But you can move Burnham to Viper. You could even move Bryce Young to Viper and say, hey, look, if I have to take one of them away, let's say there's 2 more injuries at Viper again. And because when the spring ended, 3 of your top 4 Vipers were out.
Yep.
With injuries.
Yep.
So you got to move Burnham back to Viper. Okay, so I got to go into the season with Bryce Young, Cole Mullins, and Christopher Burgess as my defensive ends. Okay, let's roll. I love the depth here at end. And it does give you some protection if Viper becomes an issue again. So you could easily just move Burnham, or in certain situations, Young, over to Viper and say you've got Burnham and Viper, or Burnham and Young on the field together. It doesn't really matter who's Viper, who's end. You can kind of have some flexibility there if there's injuries at that position. So, and I think we'll see a little bit more of that this year, just in general. I think that's one of these shifts we're going to see, is there will be times you'll have 2 ends on the field. There could even be some scenarios where you have 2 Vipers on the field, because Boubacar can play both sides. The game of Boubacar, the last 2 games of the season before Boubacar got hurt against Miami and against he got hurt against Louisville, he was playing both end spots. He was playing end and Viper. And so just people understand, defensive end is the strong side end position. Viper's the weak side end position. That was, It's what Isaiah Foskey played. It's what Junior Tilamaka and Boubacar and Patelho all played last year. Burnham played both as well last season. And then RJ Oben was the end. So that's basically what it is. It's essentially a strong side and weak side end. I believe Notre Dame is trying to go away from that as exclusively as they had it in the past. And I think you'll see some scenarios where you could have two ends in the field, two Vipers in the field from a personnel standpoint, just depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So I think the players are going to have to know both a little bit more than they have in the past as the entire unit. But I think the depth at end, especially with Chris Burgess coming in, gives you some protection if you have injury issues again at the Viper position.
I think across the board, the two end groups are more apt to handle injuries than what they were a year ago, because we now know, Mr. Show Me over here, we know what they are capable of doing. Junior Tuihalamaka didn't take a single defensive snap in the first two games and finished the year second on the team in total pressures. With Bryce Young, you knew he was going to pan out, but you didn't know what it was going to look like because he was a true freshman. Physically, it was off the charts. You're 6'7", you're 265, you have Hall of Fame genes. Nobody thought it was like, yeah, Bryce is just not going to be that good, but we didn't know how good. We've gotten to see it. With Cole Mullins, he's moving back to the end position. We got to see what that was about in the spring. Logan Thomas, in the moments that he was on the field, was a very efficient and effective pass rusher. So even if worst case scenario, this group gets hit with the injury bug again, I can look at this depth chart and say they're more apt to handle it this year. Whereas last year, if we would have said, well, if some Vipers go down, then Junior Tuihalamaka steps up. Last year, I'm not going to lie, I would have been like, okay, got to step up. And last year he did, to your point, Brian, about answering the bell. I feel a lot better about.
We didn't know if Junior could really play at that high level as an end.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I graded Junior as a guy in the 2022 class that I loved, I graded him as a middle linebacker.
Yeah.
I thought he could maybe move inside, but I didn't know. I didn't know if he'd be able to handle it. And he, like you said, Trev, he stepped up and was money for them last year. Not just money from the standpoint of he answered the bell and was able to take snaps, but he made impact plays. The interception against Miami, Ohio, which was the first game he played in the season, I believe, like to start a game, because he didn't get his first snaps until the middle of the third game against Purdue when Patelho went down and they had a big lead. Mm-hmm. Because to your point, he didn't play a snap of defensive football in the first two games of the year. He wasn't hurt because he played special teams. He was way down the depth chart.
Yep.
But then he steps up and he's mentally ready to go. And he becomes, you think of he had two huge plays against Georgia. He had a big sack in the first half. And then he also recovered that fumble that on RJ Oben's sack. So yes, the only question I have, Trev, related to injury, and we'll dive more into this into the season, into the summer, is how good will the end position be?
Sure.
Compared to last year. Like, I think at the very minimum, it's going to be every bit as good as it was last year, which is solid. It was a solid unit last year. It wasn't anything special. I think it's got a chance to be much better, but that's more of the bigger question. There's nothing about, hey, are they going to be worse than they were last year? Mm. It's, okay, will they be better? And if so, how much better? Those are more of the questions that we have about.
Fair enough. Yep. Transitioning over to the defensive tackle room, the interior of the defensive line, we have it split into two different groups, defensive tackles and nose tackles. And the first thing that I noticed when you look at this list, we've been saying it all offseason, I think it just looks better on paper when you can see it. This room has gotten significantly bigger across the board at either position, at nose and at defensive tackle. But this was a big riser for both of us in the offseason, Brian. I'm talking about some of the questions that we had, what we got answered, because the outlook of this group looked significantly different at the start of March than it does right now at the start of May. So walk us through a little bit of your process here in ranking these guys.
To your point, Trev, last year your starting defensive tackle was 295 and your starting nose tackle was 285. And your number two nose tackle off the bench was in the 270s. Donovan Heinrich is up at 280. Mm-hmm. And then Jason Onye was in the 290s. And Gabriel Rubio was hurt, so he wasn't even on the depth chart. But he eventually was added and was bigger. So a couple things about this. Number one is, like the edge players and like other positions, don't get too caught up into who's one or who's two. it doesn't really matter because they're all going to play. The first two guys on both of these depth charts are going to play this year. They're going to play a lot. The question then becomes, what about behind that? And so right now, I fully expect Armel Mukam to play a lot. And I think you could see Armel at 3 different positions. I think the way this group performed in the spring also gave defensive coordinator Chris Ash and D-line coach Al Washington the comfort to say, we're going to put 3 of these guys in the field at some times, which they did in the spring. They had 3 of these guys in the field together in sort of an odd look with Armel Mukam on the edge in a 3-down look with Preston Zinner walked up. Is that like a nickel package? Is that just sub package? Like, what is it? I don't know. But that's what we saw in the blue gold game. Is it them just trying to mess with Miami and A&M to think like, hey, you saw this in the spring? I don't know. But we did see it. And Armel looked pretty good doing it. And so it's like, hey, if they were just messing with A&M and Miami, I'm like, you know what, guys? We may want to think this through a little bit and maybe do some of this. But the point is, you're much bigger, you're much deeper now. And essentially you lose Riley Mills and Devin Houston, Howard Griffith, good Lord. I'll get it eventually. 3rd time's a charm. Howard Cross. I'm thinking of my guy, Howard Griffith, who was on those 2 Super Bowl teams for the Broncos. But this is where they are. This is not our opinion of what it should be. This is what we think it will be. Gabriel Rubio is going to start all year. The other reason why it's smart to have Rubio as your 1 and Dawson as your 2 is because Dawson is not a high-volume player. And when you have a guy who's not a high-volume player, the later you get him on the field, the better chance you have of having him on your available and being healthy and fresh in the 4th quarter. But that's basically what they're going to do. Now, I've asked about this. I've asked who's playing D-tackle, who's playing nose. This is what I'm told that they're going to play. They want the length that Rubio brings to the table at 3 technique. Because if I'm doing this, it's up to my opinion. I'd have Rubio as a nose and I'd have Onye as a 3 technique, but that's not how Notre Dame views it. So this is what I have been told from different sources that it's going to look like as far as the positions are going to play. However, if you watch the spring game, you will see, much like last year, that it doesn't always end up. There were times last year that Riley Mills is lined up over the center and Howard Cross is over a guard. That will happen again with this group, where they're not going to always just flip the ends and the tackles if a team changes strength. If they want to keep an under front and a team shifts their tight end, they don't need to flip their D ends. They'll just slide down a gap. That'll happen again this year. But this is what I'm told they will look like positionally going into fall camp. But like a lot of other positions, like receiver, I was told don't get too wrapped up on who's a nose and who's a 3 technique. Not with this group, because they do view a lot of these guys. What's funny is the player that I was told most likely is going to stay in one spot is Heinisch at nose tackle because of how they use the nose. This is the thing that people keep getting mistake. You see nose tackle and you think it's got to be Jordan Davis. That's not how Notre Dame uses their nose. They slant their nose a ton. And that's the reason Howard Cross was as disruptive as he has. And if you look at the nose tackle position last year, Trev, and you look at the disruption numbers between the nose tackles this past season, I mean, your 2 nose tackles last season, according to Pro Football Focus, had 41 pressures, 10 sacks, and 4 hits on the quarterback. It's a different type of position than a lot of people think when they think nose. They want more stout guys there. They want their longer guys at 3 technique because of how they call their defense. And I don't expect that to change moving forward from what I'm told. So that's why these guys are where they are. But the reality is you're probably going to see 6 guys minimum playing on a regular basis. And it's not a given that it ends up like this. Like right now I have Sean Sevillano ahead of Elijah Hughes. It's not a given that Elijah Hughes is going to stay behind Sean Sevillano. It's also not a given that Elijah Hughes is going to be a nose tackle. That's what I'm trying to say is like you guys have to understand that this is what it may look like on paper, but for the most part, all these guys are going to be somewhat interchangeable at different positions because it's similar body types, similar skill sets. Like there's not a huge difference between what certain guys do than what others guys do. Jared Dawson's the other exception to the rule because when I was having him explain to me what they want at 3 technique and what they want at nose, I said, so then is Jared Dawson going to move to nose? Like, well, he's a little different. He doesn't have the body type, but he's so disruptive and athletic that he brings some of those skills that they like at 3 technique, but we'll also see him at nose at times. That's what I'm saying. Like there's going to be a lot of interchangeableness here to this group. And it's going to be more about the rotation than people being locked into this guy's a 3, this guy's a nose, this guy's a this guy's a that. So that's kind of where it's at.
With each passing day, I get more and more confident in this group. Looking at this depth chart between DT and nose, I mean, man, there's maybe 2 guys that I will confidently say probably won't play a whole lot this upcoming
I'd really
season.
only say guaranteed 1.
Guaranteed, sure. But
Yeah.
Davion, I know he's coming back from the injury, and I don't know what that'll look like for him, but Gordy Solstead for sure. But outside of that, I mean, it makes sense. It's why you went out and got a guy like Jared Dawson, who might not have played the volume of snaps as Howard Cross, but he was used in a rotation very effectively. I think that's why they were comfortable adding weight onto Rubio, onto Onye, onto Heinisch, onto Mookum, and because I think they're going to just rotate that much more. This group's going to come at you in waves, man. They're gonna come at you in waves. It's nuts.
The other thing, too, is they're not going to use everybody the same way. When Sean Sevillano and Davion Dixon are on the field, they're not going to use them the same way they do Jason Onye and Elijah Hughes and Donovan Heinisch. So that's something to consider about it, too. So it's a really deep group. The question that we have, Trev, and we'll address this during the summer, is do they have any difference makers here? They have a lot of guys who can play. Do they have difference makers? And that'll be a conversation for another day. But a lot of numbers, and the size difference is the big one you noted, Trev. It's a much bigger group.
Yeah,
much bigger group. Even the returners are a lot bigger. Jason Onye's never been over 300 pounds until this past offseason. Donovan Heinisch is finally up to 280. I'd be curious if he gets back down in the 270s again by the time we get to fall. But, he's one of the opposite. He's usually bigger in the spring than he is in the fall.
Yeah.
Does Armel Mookum stay around 305 or does he keep adding weight? Jared Dawson's usually a little bigger than 300. He was down a couple pounds from what he was at Louisville. And so it's going to, and Brendan Vernon was having a very good spring until his knee injury. And then Marcus Freeman said he will be back this summer. Yep. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Next up is linebackers. And Brian, you and I are very, very high on this group. I don't think there's any surprise at who's lined up at the number 1 slot at Mike, but I wanted to ask and get your thoughts on what all went into the process for your order of will linebacker, because I've said this before, and the one thing that stood out to me about this group in the spring, I didn't think that anybody separated themselves in terms of, all right, this guy's probably going to be the will. So what was your thought process there?
Yeah, so number one, it ties into, I don't put guys at multiple positions. So Kingston Viliama-Asa is going to play Mike and Will. But I don't see the point in him listing them both because he can't play both at the same time. So that's why I usually only put a guy at one spot. It really came down to, honestly, Trevor, seniority and who took the first snaps in the blue gold game.
Sure.
And I think Jalen Sneed right now is probably, if they were playing a game tomorrow, I think this is what it would look like. But this is another position where at the will, I don't really care what is listed on paper. Because you're going to see those 2 guys both play will. You're going to see Kingston play will. I don't even have Rover on here because I don't know how. I didn't see a single snap all spring of Rover. Anytime they were in a 3 linebacker offense, it was like more of like a stack type of look. I think actually no, there was one day we saw them with a 3rd linebacker on the field, and I don't want to describe what they were doing, but it wasn't your base defense. So that was it. We didn't see it in the blue gold game. We saw pure nickels. So that's the other thing too, is there's a scenario where Drake, Kingston, and Jalen Sneed, or some version of those 2 inside guys are on the field with a Osbury or a Sneed at Rover. There's still that opportunity. And then of course, in the only time we saw in the blue gold game, a 3 linebacker set, it was with Preston Zinner coming up basically off the edge. So it wasn't really like a linebacker. So here's basically where I went with it, Trev, is right now, Kingston is your backup Mike. If something happens to Drake Bowen, Kingston is going into the game at Mike. So that's why he's at Mike. Understanding that he will also play at will. As we saw last year, he was the backup Mike to Drake last year, but there were times when Drake and Kingston were on the field together. I don't think that's going away. I think we will continue to see that. There will be times when Jaden Osbury will be on the field with Drake Bowen. So I just think it's one of those things where this is a position where We need to not get too wrapped up on who's 1, who's 2, who's 3, that type of thing. The interesting thing is with Kingston is, what if Kingston proves himself to be too good not to start? Do they then still does he still then play some Mike? Or does he just kind of move to Will? Like, here's what I mean. Like, let's say we get to the middle of fall camp and you're like, guys, we're sitting in the defensive staff meeting, and I got Chris Ash at the head of the table. I got Max Bulla. I got my staff. I've got Marcus Freeman in the room, because we're like, guys, listen, here's where we're at. Kingston's my number 2 Mike. I'm rotating him in. When Drake's on the field, Kingston's going in at Mike. But here's the problem. He's my second best linebacker, or my best linebacker, and my second best linebacker is Drake. Or he's my number 2 linebacker, and Drake's our best linebacker. And what do? Do we still have him as sort of a rotation guy, or do we say, hey, look, he's not going to be our Will, and he's going to play mostly Will? Or do you still say, okay, he may start at Will, but we're still going to also have him play Mike to maximize his volume of reps? Like, that's what I don't know, where part of me says, because he is young, I want him to just work at Will to get that experience. But then I also say, but he kind of handled both relatively well-ish last year. When I mean relatively well, I mean mentally and from a assignment correctness standpoint. Kingston had some big misses last year. So did Drake. But overall, I think Kingston handled playing both Mike and Will relatively well. If you just put him at Will, then you're going to limit how many snaps he can play. But if he's starting at Will, but then at times he's playing Mike when Drake needs a breather, then I can get more from Kingston and still playing my other Wills. I ultimately think that's what will happen, even if Kingston's too good not to start. I still think he'll play both. But if not, then all of a sudden Bodie Cahoon and Kahano Kia move up. And I think part of that decision could also be determined by them. It's like, look, we've got to find a way to get Bodie Cahoon on the field. So let's give him the few times that we need to actually take Drake off the field. We're gonna put Bodie in there and leave Kingston at Will. I think that you could see that, but as of right now, I think it's going to be a 4-man rotation at linebacker between Drake, Kingston, Jalen, and Jaden. I think all 4 are going to play. I think Preston Zinner could find a role. Kingston will certainly have his third down role. I could see Bodie Cahoon forcing his way onto the field, and I could see Madden Faramo forcing his way on the field. But and I would argue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 of these guys, at least, are going to be regulars on special teams. At least.
Oh, sure.
At least 7. My list does not include Kahano Kia. It does not include Anthony Saka. It does not include Teddy Rizak yet. You could really get into a situation where it's up to 10. That's what I'm saying. At least 7. Like, if you put the top 5 guys on both of these sides of the ball, both Mike and Will, and on my kickoff coverage, so no DBs, no running backs, no, just those, you've got a very athletic group of guys running down the field.
Yep. Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Now, I wouldn't do that. I don't want Drake running down on kickoffs. I don't necessarily want Kingston running down on kickoffs next year.
Oh, gosh, no.
I'm just making the point that that's how athletic this group is, that you could go 5 deep on both sides and say, you're our kickoff guys. It's a fun group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And
Sure
Kingston's going to be your most versatile weapon this year, because he'll play some Mike, he'll play some Will, and he'll continue, I think, with his role as a pass rusher on third down. I think he's a more natural pass rusher than Jalen Sneed. Jalen Sneed is successful in pass rushing because he's super athletic.
Yep.
Kingston understands how to win with his pass rushing skills. That's the difference. And so I still think he's going to be your most versatile piece. Drake's your Mike. He's going to play Mike. But I think Kingston's your chess piece at linebacker. But I you know what? We should have done this. I want to count how many times Drake and Kingston were on the field together last year and compare it to this year, because I think we're going to see more of that this year than we did last year.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that.
And that's not 100% just my opinion. It's mostly my opinion, but it's not 100% just my opinion.
Good deal. Next up, we got the safety position. And one of the questions that I was going to ask you when I saw this was what went into the field safety depth chart? Did you, same thing, just went with seniority?
Yeah. Well, I think
order?
Luke Talents right now is the guy there. This is another one, your common theme. It sounds lazy, but it's actually what I'm told and what's true is, again, don't get too wrapped up in the field versus boundary for some of these guys.
Okay.
I think Jalen Stroman's going to Jalen Stroman's either going to start at field or kind of rotate between the two. But basically, it's a lot of it's just about kind of where the spring ended. Jalen Stroman, his push putting him there is more so about balancing the depth chart, because he'll have a shot to start at the field safety position. Like Jalen Stroman, Luke Talents, Tay Johnson, and Jadon Blair are all going to get a shot to start at the field safety position in the fall. But right now, for the purposes of balancing out the depth chart and understanding that Jalen is going to play both, is why I have it there for now. I didn't want to have one with 5 and one with 3, and then you're like, why is Tabron Benny Powell the number 2 boundary safety? I didn't want to put Tay and Luke there because they didn't play there in the spring. Neither did Jadon Blair. None of those guys played there in the spring. They all played field. And Adon played where he played in the fall, which is the boundary safety position. So that's basically what it went into, is just, okay, where do I put Jalen Stroman? Well, I'm just going to put him in the boundary for now, knowing that he's going to battle with those two guys. So it was more about just getting Jalen in a position where, because otherwise, Trev, based on how the spring ended, I'd have to have him probably behind Tay Johnson and Luke Talents. But if we're talking about projecting into the fall, I have to see Jalen Stroman in this defense first before I'm quite ready to name the starter. It's very similar to what happened last year. Going into the spring, it's like, okay, well, where Rod Hurd's going to start at safety. And then Adon hopefully earns a spot in the rotation. Well, by the end of the spring, it was like, dude, I don't think Rod Hurd's going to start anymore. I mean, that's how good Adon Schuler was in spring. And I kind of feel that way a little bit with Jalen Stroman, where he's going to have to play really well this spring to start over Luke Talents or Tay Johnson or Jadon Blair. And I was told by a couple different people that the last week of spring practice, the most impressive guy they had was Jadon Blair. But Luke was the most consistent. Tay had some really good moments. So the question for Jalen Stroman is, where does he going to play? How much is he going to play, and does he start? And if he does start, will it be right away? I think those are all very fair questions. And you could have also put Tabron Benny Powell at nickel, because they did play him at nickel a little bit this spring. But I still think safety is his number one position for right now. And we even saw Ben Minnick playing at Summit safety in the spring as well. But I think that had to do with certain guys being out, because you didn't have Jadon Blair in the spring game. You didn't have Jalen Stroman in the spring game. And you didn't have Brandon Logan in the spring game. So I think Ben is primarily going to be working as a nickel this spring. But I think it's going to be interchangeable. But I just am struck by the thing that you sent me the other day, where Trev took a screenshot of just the heights of the safety room. And he was like, dude, this looks like a receiving corps. On paper, it looks like a receiving corps. Literally. You got a bunch of 6'2" plus guys, and you're just like, that looks like a bunch of receivers. Like, there'd be a lot of teams envious of the length and the height and the athleticism of this as a receiving corps. And it's the safeties. And they can run. They can all run.
Yeah. The overall size and length of this group is absolutely crazy. I mean, 6'5", 6'4", 6'3", 6'2", multiple 6'1" guys. I mean, your most experienced player from last year is now probably the shortest that's going to play a lot this year, which is just crazy. It's just crazy. Moving forward, I'm going to be really interested to see what the rotation is going to look like.
There's a picture, and I believe Jadon Blair's dad put it out, but he sent it to me the other day, and it was hilarious because it's a picture of Jadon next to is Jadon next to, actually maybe Jadon put it out, but it was him next to, actually let me see if he retweeted it, but it was Jadon in a practice after he broke up a pass standing next to, I'm actually going to pull this up. So give me a second, because this is hilarious. It actually just speaks to what we're talking about. But just give me a second to pull this up, because I want you guys. Some of you have already probably seen it, but I saw this and I'm like, this is a starting safety at Notre Dame this past season in this photo. Like, it was hilarious when I saw it. But here, let me make it a little bit bigger. It won't get bigger. But this is funny. Let me pull this up. See if you guys can all see this. That bottom photo, that's a Don Schuler standing next to Jadon Blair. That was your tallest safety in 2024, standing next to your freshman.
Well, and I know even the top photo, man. I mean, that's Eli Raritan.
And breaking up a pass against Eli, yeah.
Like, I know he's jumping, but Eli Raritan is 6'7".
Right.
I mean, that's
well, but also if he's on the field against Eli Raritan and with Don Schuler, what else does that tell you? He's taking a rep with the ones. So the thing that made it challenging to put this together was that all of those kids got work with the ones during the spring, all of them. And it's not a given that like they're all going to play. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's fair to say having Jadon third now, partly because out of seniority, but the other part of it is I think that we've seen Tay have some good moments. Luke had some good moments, and I'd honestly just put Jadon there simply because of he's just a freshman, and he's going to have to continue it in the fall. He's got to prove it a little bit more, but I think the first three guys that field I really think it's going to be hard for Notre Dame not to have a 5-man safety rotation this year. I don't know that that's what Mike Mickens and Chris Ash want, but who do you take off the field? You take Bronte Johnson off the field? You're going to take Luke Talich off the field? You're going to take Jalen Stroman off the field? So it's going to be interesting to see how this rotation goes. I don't think they want to play 5. I think they're going to have to play 5 because of how good they are. And as a coach, that's a great situation to be in. Like, well, I only wanted to play 3 or 4, but we're going to play 5. Why? Because they all earned it. They all gave me a reason to play them. I also don't think it is out of the question that there will be times we see 3 safeties on the field together, and I don't think it's out of the question that there's at times where we see Luke and Jadon on the field together in certain looks. Just maybe something I was told a couple times. We'll see. But
yeah. That's my dream. I mean, you put Jadon Blair and Luke Talich on the basketball court and have them run 2-3 zone. Having those two stand up and spread their arms across the top of the key would be enough to eat up a lot of space. Mm-hmm. Seeing them on a football field is going to be awesome.
Yep.
Rounding it out with the corners. And we have it divided up into 3 separate ones: nickel, field, and boundary corner. At the top of the list, I don't think there's surprises to anybody who is the number 1 on here between Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, and Devontae Smith. But I am very interested to see how the rest of this builds out behind it, because I think you have players in here that can play multiple. For example, for me, I look at Carson Hobbs, and we talked before about how he might just be your number 2 corner.
Possibly. As of right now, I would say that that's accurate. As of right now, if they were playing a game this Saturday and something happens to Leonard Moore, I think Carson Hobbs goes in instead of Cree Thomas. If something happens to Christian Gray, I think he would go in instead of obviously Mark Zachary or anybody else. And I don't think it's out of the question to think that if something happened to Devontae Smith, that Carson might not be the next guy in there as well. I don't know that it's going to be true by the time we get to the end of fall camp, because I think at least Dallas Golden is going to have an opportunity to say, okay, I'm the number 2 nickel, or I'm the number 2 boundary, depending on what they choose to do. I think by the end of fall camp, there's at least a shot that Dallas or Mark Zachary is in the 2 deep somewhere. And Cree Thomas has locked himself into a spot also. So I don't know that that's going to maintain. And I'll say this, the way that Carson Hobbs played this spring, they're going to have to play really well for him not to be that guy. Yeah. But if he goes into the game somewhere else, he can no longer be the number 2 somewhere else. Like the minute he's thrust in as a 1, you better hope you've got a number 2 somewhere else that can play. So let's say something happens to Christian Gray and he can't go. He's been kicked out because of targeting. That's the best way. First play of the series, first play of the game, Christian Gray gets called for targeting. He's out. So that way there's no injury or anything bad. Okay, so Carson Hobbs is your field corner. All right, well, what do you do if on the next play Leonard Moore goes down with targeting? And on the third play, Devontae Smith goes down with targeting. First of all, I'm at that point, I'm like, okay, this is a conspiracy by the ACC or Big 12 officiating crew. But I'm making the point that you need, like having Carson Hobbs there as that I can go anywhere is a great tool to have in your toolbox as long as your top 3 tools are still in good shape. You can't use them for all of them. You know what I mean? At the same time, it's like, well, if I only got one need, then I can take that. But what if there's something going on and you need all 3 tools working at the same time?
Sure.
Well, okay, I need 3 tools now. So who's that next guy? Is it going to be Cree Thomas somewhere? Is it going to be Mark Zachary somewhere? Is it going to be Ben Minnick somewhere? Is it going to be Dallas Golden somewhere? That's what fall camp is going to tell us. Because you're going to have to establish a depth chart behind Carson Hobbs. Even if he maintains he's our next guy going in everywhere, but who's the next guy that goes in if there's another need for another guy because he can't play all those spots? Carson probably thinks he can. That's just the kind of personality he has. Is he's like, oh, I got him. I play all of them. You know what I mean? I'm saying being sarcastic a little bit. He's got that incredible swagger and confidence in himself. But if he's at one spot, then somebody else has to be there somewhere else. Who is that guy? That's what fall camp's going to tell us. But it's a very young corner room, Trev.
Yeah.
I mean, this is another one where you're going into next year. You only have 2 guys that can't come back, and one of them's a walk-on. Everybody else has eligibility to return. And your best player on this list can't even go pro if he wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And your jack of all trades corner we just talked about couldn't go pro if he wanted to. And then, of course, you have the outstanding freshman class coming in. I mean, we watched Dallas Golden's film last week, and people getting excited about it and all that. So I just don't see how that kid's going to have to find a role somewhere. If I'm Notre Dame, he's gonna get a shot in the secondary. He's going to get a shot to return kicks, return punts. Like that kid's got to play for you. He's got to find a home for you this year. And I'm also very curious to see what Mark Zachary does. Like the thing that excites me is Mark Zachary and Dallas Golden, neither of them are overly technically sound. They're both just big-time football players. Because they had to do so much, it was hard for them to really harness the technical proficiency of a Benjamin Morrison, who was really just a one-way. Benjamin played some receiver, but he's mostly a DB. But Benjamin also grew up in the home of a former NFL DB. It's just a different animal. And Brophy Prep clearly has good coaching because Cree was a pretty fundamentally sound player as well. Not as much as Benjamin, but still sound. But Mark and Dallas had to do so much for their high schools. They were two-way standouts. They were the best offensive and best defensive players on their team. They both returned kicks that it's hard for them to have and Mark plays basketball. So it's not like he can just go to some cornerback trainer's camp during the winter. He's playing basketball.
Sure.
I can't wait to see what those 2 guys with a month of Mike Mickens work have under their belt, which they will get some Mike Mickens work during the summer, the way that it goes now, but especially in fall camp. So even though they're third now, I would not feel super comfortable if I'm coming into fall camp and I've got Dallas Golden or Mark Zachary behind me. I would not feel super comfortable about my place in the depth chart at all. I don't care who you are. So that's a really talented corner room. And with Devontae Smith looking as good as he did this spring, it's like, okay.
Yeah.
They're going to be good.
Yeah. With as talented as a kid like Dallas Golden is, how would you work him to not sacrifice him getting enough development at either position?
Well, I think that's where Cree and Carson performing as well as they did this spring helps you feel maybe comfortable putting him at nickel and starting him there. Because if you look at it, if Dallas is what you think he is as a coach, and believe me, the sources I have inside the program, they have an opinion of Dallas Golden that is very similar to mine. And same with Mark Zachary, but like there's a lot of people that think Dallas is special. If you think that to be true, what is the position where he has the fastest way in the starting lineup?
Yeah.
It's nickel.
Yeah.
It's a position he's talked in the past about wanting to play. I mean, you get guys getting drafted in the first round of the NFL now being drafted as nickels. What was the guy from Ohio State a few years ago that was drafted number 4 overall as a slot? And the whole point, Denzel Ward? Was it Denzel Ward? You know, it's a starter position now, especially in the Notre Dame offense. I mean, it's a starter position. And so eventually I want Dallas to be able to play everywhere. But I think if you look at where's his path, the easiest path into the 2 deep right now is nickel, and the fastest position that's going to come available as a starter is at nickel. Because Devontae Smith's the only guy that has to leave. And Leonard Moore can't leave. Not as far as college football. So that's kind of
makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm with you on the cornerback room, man. It's just I put an article out about it the other day, but it's weird to think that for like the 3rd year in a row, Notre Dame is going to be in the conversation for having one of, if not the best cornerback rooms in college football. And
yes,
and this year could potentially be from top to bottom, could be the best of the 3.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy, man. It's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, I mean it's it really is. But honestly, wherever Dallas Golden, same with Mark Zachary, like these guys are. When I during the recruitment process, talk to different people in the program, and I say, hey, can Dallas play field? Yes. Well, have you thought about him at the boundary? Yes. What about nickel? Yes. And it was the same conversation with Mark Zachary, and with Cree Thomas, it was both. It was field and boundary. There's not one of them that they said he's going to be here and he's not playing anywhere else. And that's kind of what Mike Mickens wants is, look, if this guy's ready to play, we're going to find a home for him. I don't think. I mean, Christian Gray was recruited to play boundary corner, and he got thrust into the field corner last year because that's where the need was. And then when Benjamin got hurt, it was just easier to put Leonard into that position because he had practiced it there, where Christian had only been playing field. Well, I want to point out to people what was the least effective game that Leonard Moore had last year? What was the game he got beat more than any other game? It was Louisville playing the field position. It's just a more challenging position, and when you're playing pure man. So you look at it and Trevin, it's a deep room, dude. It's a really deep room, but it's young and it's very unproven after the starters. And that's the concern. That's the position on defense where I think I have the biggest question marks about the 2 deep. As from an experience standpoint is a corner, but the talent is really good. Really good.
Well, it looks a little different than the safety room too, man. But I mean, even this room is getting longer.
Yeah.
They're getting taller and longer. I mean, out of the 11 guys in this room, only 4 of them are under 6 foot.
And 3 of them are walk-ons.
Yep.
And one of them is a portal guy. So, I mean, every kid that you've recruited in the last few years is 6 feet or taller. So, yeah, it's a good size room. It's a very good size room. It's hard to not get excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to not get excited about that. So that's the depth chart. Special teams, it's really just about where does Eric Schmidt fall into the play. Noah Burnett's your starter, place kicker. James Rendell's your punter. Eric Schmidt was recruited as a guy that could potentially do all 3. Does he earn the kickoff specialist job this year? Does he earn the starting place kicking job also? Is he your number 2 punter, or is that somebody else? There's some question marks there, but that'll all be determined in fall camp as well.
Good deal. Good deal. Well, that's going to do it for the recap of what we had for Notre Dame's depth chart moving forward. But don't go anywhere. We do still have some mailbag questions that we're going to get to. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards where you can visit the Champions Lounge at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, we got some mailbag
Real quick
questions.
before we get to there, it's not Denzel Ward, the people in the chat. It's not Denzel Ward that. It was Greg Newsome that's playing was playing this slot position. So I was incorrect. Just want to make sure we're clear on that. So go ahead and pause for a second, Trev, and then get to the mailbag again. And that should be quick. We don't have a ton of mailbags. We got some good questions we'll get to.
All right, Brian, we got a mailbag. And we have a handful of questions that we're going to get to. Again, in order to get your question answered or comment answered, please be sure to put MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji. And to ensure that your question gets answered, we always appreciate a super chat. That'll get you bumped to the top. But without further ado, we got some mailbag questions to get to. Super chat from Mark1. Thank you for the super chat, Mark. How is the new facility build cycle going? Never hear much about it.
I don't know what I'm supposed to say about a building that's being constructed that we would talk about it. I don't know why you would hear anything about it until it's done. But since you asked and you left a super chat, which I appreciate, Mark, it's actually coming along pretty well, Trev. I mean, we walked by that going to a couple of practices, and the thing that I said to you was that building's going to be a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. Because when they first started to kind of like laying the foundation, it was a much smaller part, and now they're starting to add on a whole new section to it. So it's going to be a whole lot bigger than I thought. And it goes from where the tennis courts were all the way down to almost in front of the Goog. It's massive. And the front door is going to be huge. It's going to look a lot like the Goog. It's going to be a massive front door. It's going to have like that arch-looking type thing that like a lot of the buildings on campus have. It's going to look sharp. But it's supposed to be ready in 2026, I believe. It doesn't look like it's like, like way ahead of schedule. There's still a lot of work to be done. We still see a lot of steel when we walked by it last month, but it's definitely you're starting to get a sense now of what for what it's going to look like, just raw structurally, height, width, depth, things like that. So it's going to be awesome.
Going to be awesome to see, man.
Yep. Because we were talking about that one day we were walking into practice, like, dude, this is a much bigger building than I thought it was going to be. Much bigger building.
Question in here from Dane. Post-spring practice rankings, Notre Dame is behind Penn State. What in the world? Obviously, this is a tongue-in-cheek question with the way too early reaction.
So I'm going to answer this one because you're the one that has Penn State ahead. But I'm going to make the case of why I think some people are overreacting way too much to people who have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. I would not rank Penn State ahead of Notre Dame. I've said this multiple times, but I have them like a spot or two behind Notre Dame. Because I understand that you don't like James Franklin. There's not many people in positions of like I have, where you have some sort of audience mouthpiece, like you can say things and have a platform that other people don't have, who are more critical of James Franklin than this guy. I understand that. But as I've said, the coordinator hires he's made, and this is why I said, don't be shocked if Penn State's better than people think they are this past season. And they were. They still lost the big games, but they were far more competitive. That's a step in the right direction. But you can't look at what they have coming back and just say, hey, this team sucks. And I know the new popular thing is let's talk about how bad Drew Aller sucks, right? Like Bo Nix isn't here anymore to kick around, and he proved out to be better than people thought. So who's the new guy we're going to pretend has never done anything good so we can just always focus on the things he's done wrong? That's now Drew Aller. And with Drew Aller, there's this really weird dichotomy between the people that want to pretend like he's a number one draft pick, which he's not, and people want to act like he sucks, which he doesn't. He's a good football player, but he doesn't have to be a hero because he's got a really good supporting cast. Yes, they lost Tyler Warren. They've got very good tight ends coming along, and their receiving core is going to be much better, in my opinion, this year than it was last year. Their entire starting offensive line comes back. They've got, in my opinion, if you're going to go 1A, 1B, corner running back rooms nationally, everyone feels that they're either 1 or 2 with Notre Dame. We think they're 2. Even the guy that has Penn State ranked number 1 thinks they're 2. They are losing an elite defensive end. But you know what they're going to have this year? Another guy who people are going to consider one of the best defensive ends in college football. They return a lot from their secondary, a lot at linebacker, and they made another good defensive coordinator hire. and they were a Final Four team last year. I don't think they're better than Notre Dame, but I think it's a little bit kind of agenda-driven for people to be losing their minds. How do you have any capacity? How I can't understand how Penn State might be ahead of Notre Dame. It's bias. No, it's not. It's people making an evaluation of a team that returns they had fewer guys drafted than Notre Dame did. You guys understand that, right? Yes, they had 2 guys drafted higher, but they had fewer guys drafted than Notre Dame. They also had some very good portal pickups that make them better at certain spots. I think Penn State's going to be a good football team. I think that James Franklin is enough for me not to rank them ahead of Notre Dame just on that alone. But even a James Franklin-led team led Notre Dame 10-0, and Notre Dame needed a late field goal and a pick to win that game. And they battled Ohio State. They were a yard away from tying that ball game up. They battled Oregon, and that's a bad matchup for them. So I just think that there's this weird, I hate James Franklin, so I can't acknowledge that his team is really flipping good. I can't stand Ryan Day, and I think he's almost as bad of a coach as James Franklin, and he just won himself a natty. Larry Coker has a national championship ring. Sometimes you have enough talent. Ed Orgeron has a ring. Gene Chizik has a ring. Jimbo Fisher has a ring. Guys, bad coaches have won titles a lot. When your roster's good enough, you can be really good. That's why I think anyone that wants to say, well, they're not a top 4 or 5 team. Okay, you're in your Penn State bias, which I understand. I don't think they're better than Notre Dame, but I understand why some people would put them there. And we'll talk a little bit more on Thursday about how I think Notre Dame has more to prove. And I think some of the benefit of the doubt that Penn State is getting from some national people bothers me, because I think they have even more to prove now than Notre Dame does. But that's a different conversation than what we're having right now. But I wanted to say that, Trev, because I know you're probably getting a little tired of repeating yourself. And I'm saying, look, I don't even have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame, but here's my case for why I can understand why somebody would. And I don't think it's a crazy notion to think that they might be a team that with a legit chance to win a title. If you put any coach on their team, any good coach, you give them Penn State's roster, and we're having a different conversation. Yeah, Brian, but they do have James Franklin. I get that. That's why they're not my number one. But you can't ignore that roster's not what it is to at least understand why someone would have them ahead. So I get that. I can sit there and say they're not ahead of Notre Dame for me. And I didn't think twice about it. And Notre Dame beating Penn State's just part of the reason, but that was last year's team. This is a different team. But I certainly think that they have a shot to win a championship if they can just not have James Franklin screw it up and maybe catch a couple breaks like some teams with better rosters get knocked out and they don't have to play him. So that's my 2 cents. And you even said, Trev, part of the reason you don't want to put Notre Dame number one is because you didn't want to come across as a total homer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of it too.
Oh, yeah. No, I appreciate you.
And by the way, Michael Campbell, if you're going to say something, at least be accurate. Penn State did not lose both coordinators. Andy Kotelnicki is still their offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
So
well, and
at least be accurate with your comments.
Oh, yeah. They placed a really good defensive coordinator with a really good defensive coordinator.
Bingo.
Preseason rankings for me are interesting because I try to leave as much of the previous year's success out of it as I can to a certain degree, but yeah, I try to look and project. I take schedule into consideration. I take returning players into consideration, who they lost, portal pickups. And that's the interesting thing for me, because honestly, if you were to ask me who I think is the better football team, I think it's Notre Dame. But on paper, when I look at everything that they have returning, I would be willing to say that Chris Ash is more of a question mark than what Jim Knowles is. Both schools have offensive coordinators going into year 2. Archer, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this, because we were having that head coach conversation about some of the head coaches that people weren't really that high on that have rings. Who would you attribute the success of Ohio State's national championship run to? Do you think it was more of Ryan Day, or do you think it was more of Chip Kelly and Jim Knowles in his 3rd year? So I think all of those things come into play. I think that's what's interesting about this team. But it is weird, because if somebody were to ask me, just comes up to me in the streets, like, who do you think's better, Notre Dame or Penn State? Like, I think Notre Dame for this reason. But if you were to make the argument that you think Penn State is a better team, at least listen to it, more so than if somebody wanted to say that Oregon or Texas were a better team. Those are the teams that get ranked ahead of Notre Dame that I have more of an issue with than Penn State, truly. And so that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, and people say, well, like somebody said they were a Final Four team solely because of seeding. That's a very good football team. They aren't one of the 4 best. Who's better? Who last year would have been better? Georgia? Well, I saw Penn State play the same exact team that Georgia played, and Penn State was far more competitive against Notre Dame than Georgia was. Oregon? Maybe. Oregon beat them in the head-to-head. Maybe Oregon. But then I also watched Oregon on the brightest stage they played in all year get curb stomped by a team that Penn State played far more competitively in the only time they played. So if you're going to say – why are we assuming that Texas is better than them? I would make the same case about Texas, that Texas got to where they got to because of seeding, because they had to play Clemson and Arizona State, 2 teams that didn't even finish in the top 12 at the end of the regular season. And they beat one of them by 2 touchdowns, and the other one took them to overtime. So even if you want to say Oregon's there, okay, cool, but why are you assuming Texas is there? Because did Texas beat a single top team all year? They lost to Georgia twice. They got beat by Ohio State. What's the big win Texas is hanging their hat on? Arizona State in overtime? Clemson? That's my question.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The last little nugget I'll add is a lot of people bring up the fact that they don't have Abdul Carter or Tyler Warren, 2 top 15 NFL draft picks. But here's the thing. If you're going to look at Notre Dame's team and say, yes, they lost Xavier Watts, but they have all this coming back, then you have to pass on the same sentiment to Penn State, because Penn State fans aren't looking at Luke Talich and being like, well, maybe the 1 punt returner is. But
facts.
But Penn State fans aren't looking at like, yo, Notre Dame's got Bronte Johnson. But we are.
Right.
They have versions of that on their team too. You have to look at it with that much.
Do you think they're sitting there like, well, they're saying the same thing that you guys are saying about Notre Dame?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they don't have Riley Leonard anymore. Yeah, but they don't have Riley Mills anymore. Well, I know he didn't play against us, but still, he was good for them. Hey, they don't have Xavier Watts anymore. So he was a pretty good player against them. So we lost as Notre Dame fans. We lost our 2 stud, 2-time All-American safety. They lost their All-American defensive end. They lost their stud tight end, and Notre Dame lost their starting boundary receiver, their starting quarterback. They're starting center, they're starting guard from the game that they played. So that's what good teams do. They reload. So, again, I don't see how anyone could watch Georgia play last year and try to argue that Georgia's better than Penn State.
100%.
Like anyone trying to tell me Georgia last season was better than Georgia has an anti-Penn State bias or a James Franklin bias. And I'm sympathetic to the James Franklin bias. But nothing about Georgia last year should tell anyone that they were a better team than Penn State.
Oh, yeah.
Same with Texas. You're going off reputation, not what they actually did on the field.
Yeah. And Archer, you answered your own question a little bit. The second part of your comment, you said part of being a good coach is getting your coordinators right and getting talent on your team. I would say that James Franklin did that.
As well as anyone in the country outside of maybe Marcus Freeman. Based for 2025.
Yeah.
Because Ohio State's jury's still out on the 2 new coordinator hires he made. So, and again, if you want to talk about that, didn't he just take your championship-winning defensive coordinator, Ohio State fans? Like, didn't he just get him over? Or are we going to now say, well, Knowles didn't really, even though Ohio State won primarily because of defense, Knowles wasn't really the driver. Are we going to somehow poo-poo that? Isn't that part of being a great head coach, is making good hires? So, and I said this, that's the best thing James Franklin ever did, was recruiting coordinators who can overcome his deficiencies as a head coach. Isn't that what Marcus Freeman did when he first got hired, by hiring a bunch of veterans? Guys, he said, I want guys with head coaching experience and coordinator experience because that's going to help me. Someone who's never done it. So, yeah.
All right. Now I'm done defending James Franklin for a while.
Yeah.
All righty.
Well, it's like with a lot of things, Trev. It's like we have a tendency to take things to extremes.
Yeah.
And say, hey, look, I don't think they're better than this team or this team. But now we're going to be like, they're better than Texas? Not better than Texas or Georgia? Based on what? Historically speaking, sure. They're not better.
Yeah.
But what about Georgia's team last year says that they weren't a top 4 team? Because that's what you're making the case. What about Texas last year makes you think Texas was better than Penn State?
Mm-hmm.
Other than you're in your feels. It's like people that try to say, well, Texas is a better offensive team than Notre Dame. Based on what? Because all I know is Notre Dame scored more points than Texas did last year.
By 3.
You know, I mean, what are we doing here? Texas had more yards. Notre Dame averaged more yards per play. So
it's because,
but the perception is, well, Texas is better on offense than what Notre Dame is, right? That's the perception.
Oh yeah,
Notre
it's
Dame
because
averaged more points and more yards per play.
I said this a couple months ago. It's just because it looks cooler.
Right.
It's because they can throw it. I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch all of the Notre Dame's great on defense and has a good run game, but doesn't have a good offense crowd once Notre Dame develops a passing game. Because what's the excuse going to be there? You know, it's going to start talking about the different types of grass and different surfaces that they play on as to why Notre Dame has a good offense or something. But
I just think what happens is why does Steve Sarkisian get benefit of the doubt that James Franklin does not? And this isn't a defense of James Franklin. This is what has Steve Sarkisian done as a head football coach that tells you he's better than James Franklin? What, one road win at Bama? Well, James Franklin has a win over Ohio State. James Franklin, you know, has won some games against Michigan. I mean, James Franklin has a couple of those. What has Sark done that makes you say, hey, he's better than James Franklin? Why isn't he the same as James Franklin? I just watched him get embarrassed in 2 games against Kirby Smart this past year. Embarrassed. I watched Kalen DeBoer coach circles around him in the semifinals the year before. I watched Kenny Dillingham's staff coach circles around Texas for 2 quarters to take that game into overtime. So why is Sarkisian getting the benefit of the doubt and James Franklin doesn't? Like that's my thing is what has Dan Lanning done to prove that, okay, yeah, he won that. He had a better roster than Penn State did last year. He should have won that game. Should have won it probably more convincingly than they did when you look at the specific matchups of that game.
Facts.
But then James Franklin gets on a big stage. Well, he did it against Boise State and SMU. Okay, cool. What did he do against Notre Dame? Took him down to the wire. What Dan Lanning do in the biggest stage? They got embarrassed. It was over by halftime. So, I mean, yeah, it's frustrating. Mm-hmm. There's just a lot of things that people will, and they'll talk themselves in circles trying to explain how their feelings are, you know, more important than data.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're talking to 2 guys who are not James Franklin supporters. My issue is those guys should be on the same level as James Franklin until they prove otherwise. Ryan Day, to a degree, proved otherwise this year. He did. No matter what you think about Ryan Day.
Agreed.
You beat Dan Lanning. You beat Steve Sarkisian. You beat Marcus Freeman to win a title. Bro, respect. You're not that guy anymore. Well, what if they go struggle next year? They can't take that ring away from them. They earned that ring.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it's all about, you know? So why does Sark get the benefit of the doubt? Why does Texas get the benefit of the doubt that Penn State doesn't? Well, they have a better roster than Penn State. Well, then why did they have the same record? Why did they get beat twice by Georgia, a team that Notre Dame smacked by 13 and led most of the game, and who Penn State looked far more impressive against than did Georgia? And I know that's a little bit of the, you know, well, this team beat this team who beat that team who beat that team. But it's like, how did you look in those big moments? Well, Franklin struggles in the big moments. Did you watch Steve Sarkisian's play calling at the 1-yard line against Ohio State? That's vintage James Franklin. We're going to run toss sweep at the 1? Really? Against that defense? That's your go-to? That didn't look anything like some of the dumb calls that James Franklin's made over the years? Really? Did you see his play calling in the second half against Georgia in the SEC title game? What about him makes you think that him or Texas are clearly better than Penn State? That's my thing. It's more so that
than
thinking that, oh, you know, Texas is this great program. it's yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
Beefeater ND08. Would it be a stretch to say that the Notre Dame Clemson 12-game series could be one of the key pieces to saving ACC?
It could be. Yeah, I think I like the way you phrased it because he said could be. I don't want to definitively say it's going to save the ACC because I just don't know if that's possible now. But if the ACC ends up being saved, I do think that's part of it. And Trev, I won't be shocked if Clemson's not the only team trying to do something like this. How can we guarantee to get Notre Dame on the schedule more? That's kind of what I'm curious about. So it's going to be interesting to see. I think, is Trevor frozen or am I frozen? I'm very curious because I see that Trevor's frozen, but I'm not sure if I'm also frozen. Can you guys give me a heads up on that? Or is it just me? So I think it's Trevor. All right. So I'm going to move on and then we'll get Trevor back here at some point in time. Stonador. Sorry if this has already been discussed. Is it likely that Clemson is replacing Stanford as a yearly rivalry, or will Notre Dame try to play 5-ish ACC plus Stanford, USC, Stanford, Navy, and Clemson every year? I don't know this for a fact, Stonador, so what I'm about to say is my opinion. So my opinion is that this will replace Stanford as a regular game. That's my opinion. I haven't been told this. This wasn't reported. This isn't something that was in Notre Dame's release. This is simply my opinion. I have not heard a lot from the people that I do talk to that there's this burning desire to continue to play Stanford now that they're in the ACC. I think what will happen is the ACC schedule for Notre Dame is going to have to get reworked. The schedule that's there now, I honestly don't think stays because you've got to figure out what you're going to do with Stanford and Cal and SMU for the next decade because the schedule it goes to, I think, 2035. You're going to have to revamp it. And so I think there'll probably be again, my opinion, I think there'll be some sort of negotiation with the ACC to maybe, look, we'd like Stanford on there at least X amount of times and to kind of get there. So based on the fact that Notre Dame is saying this won't, the 8 games with Clemson won't count against their 5, and the ACC is saying they will, is what tells me there will be there is some negotiation going on with the future of the ACC versus Notre Dame contract. And if you're the ACC, I understand the desire to spread Notre Dame out a little bit. You want to give some of those other teams an opportunity to play Notre Dame, and you don't just want your top teams because then playing Notre Dame creates an imbalance of revenue that's not necessarily, if you're the leader of the ACC, fair to all those teams. So then Notre Dame has to be willing to sacrifice a little bit too, and that's why I think this Clemson deal made a lot of sense. Is now it's outside of the 5 ACC games. So I think what the ACC will eventually learn is, or what Notre Dame is basically saying is, look, make this part of the 5, and then there's going to be some negotiation where the ACC says, well, hold on a second, you're scheduled that deal outside of what we're normally doing. We'd like for that not to be one of the 5, and then Notre Dame says, okay, cool, we'll agree to that as long as you agree to this, 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 or this. And the ACC be like, look, well, and that's part of the negotiation. That's how I think is going on in this. When I think of how this is going to kind of shake out. A few more questions before we get out of here.
That was wild.
Yeah, you were just kind of like stuck down there. So I was like, what's going on with Trevor?
My internet was perfectly fine. I could connect to other browsers. It just wouldn't let me log back into StreamYard.
That's very strange. It's a StreamYard deal. Doesn't shock me. Real quick from David Marazzo, our defense is loaded except for the DT room. Can now Washington elevate the D tackles enough to unleash the rest of the defense? Is it still possible to bring in another DT before the season? David, I think we addressed this to some degree during our depth chart breakdown because this question came out before that. I think they're loaded to D tackle with good football players. The question is, do they have do they have a Riley Mills at the position? Right now, I don't think that they do. Do they have guys that could potentially be that? Maybe. Maybe not this year. Maybe it's future years. But I think it's more so as a group, you're going to get similar production as a group. Sometimes it's Jared Dawson. Sometimes it's Gabriel Rubio. Sometimes it's Jason Onye. Sometimes it's Donovan Heinisch. Sometimes it's whoever. It's more of a by committee thing. I don't think that the D tackle is as big of a concern for me now as it was before the spring because of just the depth and what we saw from those guys. So yes, I do believe Al Golden is capable of doing that. Last couple before I want to get done here. I want to get done in the next 10 minutes. So let's get a few more of these in, Trev, before we got to get out of here.
Cool. Garen Knutson, when Notre Dame wins a national championship, how bad will the Notre Dame must join a conference rhetoric be nationally? Or, goodness gracious, or will there be a shift where schools attempt to get some version of independence?
No, I think that the Notre Dame must join a conference rhetoric will ramp up because it's unfair. They won because they have unfair advantages over us, because they're independent, because their schedule's this, because of all this Crimea River stuff. They get this run money, they get that money. It's just not fair. It's not fair. It's not fair. Then if Notre Dame wins the title, that ramps up even more, Garen. More. By the way, we know you're still overseas in some danger zones, serving our country, my man. I hope you're doing well. We salute you. We appreciate you taking care of people and then also serving our country. So definitely still thinking about you, praying for you, my dude, for sure. But I think it ramps up. I think that there's just no financial incentive for schools to go independent right now. There just isn't. The only way that I think schools will ever truly fight to be independent is if at some point in time, and it's going to have to come through congressional work, that they basically say, we'll grant you protection, NCAA, if you go to an NFL revenue model for TV rights, which is instead of every league kind of on their own deal, where they work out and then they keep all that money, you can still work out deals and networks will still pay X amount of dollars for the SEC, Big Ten, or whatever, but that money goes into a general fund that then gets distributed amongst all them. And I think you'll see some sort of split where it's 70, 75 teams that are now considered part of that power group, and it all gets split revenue-wise the same way. If that happens, you will see the big conferences break up. There'll be a desire to let's go back to the Pac-12. Let's go back to the Big 12. Let's go back to the Southwest Conference. Let's go back to playing in this league, because now there's no financial incentive to be in a league where we've got to travel all of our non-revenue sports across the country to play. There's no incentive for that. If their TV revenue is distributed equally, there's no reason for the Big Ten, for the Pac-12 teams to be in the Big Ten. There's no incentive for USC to then stay in the Big Ten. There's no incentive for Texas to stay in the SEC at that point in time, because you're not now getting that same benefit. So let's save millions of dollars in travel expenses by not having to travel to play those teams in all these other sports anymore. So I think that's in a way to get some additional revenue. So that's the only way we ever see anyone other than Notre Dame go truly independent. There may be some teams that are forced to go independent for some time because they think I could see Florida State being independent, but not because they want to, because they get out of the ACC deal and they realize nobody wants us because we're troublemakers. And, they got to be independent for a year or two until somebody takes them. I could see that. I'm not predicting it, but I could see it. There's just no financially, it doesn't work for them. Just doesn't work for them. Did Trev freeze again?
No, okay, I was waiting for you to bring up the next.
I didn't know if you had anything to add to that. So, nope. Yeah, no worries. This is an interesting one.
From Bubs, would you rather have elite coordinators and average position coaches, or average coordinators with elite position coaches?
I'd rather have elite coordinators. I think elite coordinators can overcome average position coaches better than the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, I would agree. Buck stops on each side of the ball with the coordinators. So I think if you had average coordinators with elite position coaches, at some point the message would get up to the top where it needed to be. Berto 2121. I think you mentioned Osborne not having film or use receiving in high school. When recruits visit, do coaches ask them to do certain drills they may not have seen?
No, you can't force guys to work out. What it really comes down to is there's just certain things you've got to project, or you got to say, hey, look, he was at this camp 2 years ago. Let me find some film of that. Or what you may say, hey, listen, could you take some, like Notre Dame has had, hey, could you work out and do this and send us the film, send us the tape? You know, teams have done that before. You can't have them work out on your campus. You could maybe say, hey, you know, hey, quarterback, when you guys are hanging out, maybe throw some balls at this kid, you know, have some fun and see if he can catch it at all. I mean, I guess you could maybe try that, but a lot of it's just, hey, we don't really necessarily need him to do that. It's okay if he can't do that. But I think there's enough film to say the kid can catch. The kid can pass block, and he's dynamic in the screen game and limited opportunity. So if we wanted to ramp that up a little bit, he's fine. It's a little bit more of a thing if it's a receiver that you haven't seen catch a whole lot, like Scrap Richardson. I might have asked him to send me a workout video of him catching the ball. I might have done that. But again, the kid catches the ball 50 times a game. So he's a shotgun quarterback. You see how he uses his hands. You can track how well he sees the ball. If he's always fumbling the ball, or you get a sense of what his hand-eye coordination is. It's a good question.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm going to ask this one, and I'm going to ask it of you. This is from Insured by Big. What is your biggest concern with having CJ or Kenny as a first-year starter?
Overall, I would say when that moment comes, being able to handle it. I'm not concerned from either kid about being able to just handle the pressure of being the starter at Notre Dame. This year, it's, look, we kind of need you to be a point guard. Notre Dame has a lot of skill, but there will come a time where it's like, okay, you have to go make a play here. And we've seen that with other quarterbacks at Notre Dame where they were first-time starters, where they had to do that. I think Everett Golson in 2012 against Pitt. You know, it's, look, you have a great defense around you. You have good offensive weapons around you, but we need you to go be a dude in this moment. And that would be my biggest concern. I don't want the word concern to make it sound like I don't think that they can, but when I'm pointing out the things that I'm confident that they can do well, that would be a concern for me. It's not that I'm afraid that they won't, but I'm not concerned about their ability to push the ball down the field. I'm not worried about their ability to handle being the starting quarterback at Notre Dame. It's just with any young quarterback, when you get into that moment, whether it's in the postseason, whether that's in the first game of the year of, hey, look, like I think of last year's Notre Dame USC game. Defense just doesn't have it today. We kind of need you to go out there and be a little bit more than, all right, I'm going to make the right read. I'm going to dump it down here. I'm not going to take a sack here. It's, hey, I need you to go make a play. That would be my biggest concern for them starting in their first year.
And the big concern I have is how many times do they need to do that?
Yep.
And if it's a lot, then there's going to be times when he's not able to get it done, whoever it is. If it's 2, 3, 4 times throughout the course of an entire 15, 16-game season, sure. That's my biggest concern is what if too much is placed on them? My biggest concern is, are they able to mentally handle the stress of the position is really my biggest thing. And you don't really know that until they're in it. I mean, there's no way to replicate playing in front of 100,000 people or 60,000 people or even really much more than 30 the way the Notre Dame spring games are. I mean, it's just still a different deal. That's really something you don't really know until they get in that moment. You can try as best you can to replicate it, but to a certain point in time, you just don't know.
Yep.
So I just, that's kind of how I look at it. I'm not concerned about their physical tools. I'm not concerned about their ability to pick up the offense. It's just about how long can you get by without having to put it all on their shoulders. I'm a lot more concerned about a redshirt freshman or a redshirt sophomore that's going to go from not having played much to now we need you to carry the team the way that Riley Leonard did last year. But they don't need them. This year's team is different than last year's team. It's just built different and different things about the team and the schedule. Look, when that time comes, I just need you to make a few plays. Other than that, it's just get the ball where it needs to go. That's the big key.
Yep. USMA 87. Do you think Nolan James redshirts?
Yeah, I hope he does. Yeah, I hope he does. I don't love redshirting skill players, but you've got to get some distance between him and the guys in front of him. I really do.
Agreed. Broke Neck Boy. Irish Breakdown's existence depends on one final stop. Which defense are you picking to stop 2019 LSU? LSU starts at their 1, and you can only pick any Brian Van Gorder defense. 22 Stanford or 23 LSU or USC.
Wow. I'm probably picking the 2015 Brian Van Gorder defense. And the reason why is those defenses are all bad, but a big reason why those other defenses were bad is they didn't have players. Like Brian Van Gorder is a bad coach, but he had Jalen Smith. So it just comes down to I'm betting on the team that has Jalen Smith, Sheldon Day, Romeo Okwara, Isaac Rochelle,
Kavari Russell.
Who?
Kavari Russell.
Kavari Russell, Cole Luke, Max Redfield, Elijah Shoemate. I'm betting on that team over the teams that were poorly coached and didn't have those dudes. That's where I'm going. Because you could say LSU in 23 had some really talented front seven guys, but their secondary was garbage. Notre Dame had several NFL caliber players in their secondary in 2015. And I'm going with that group. I mean, you had Matthias Farley didn't even start on that team. Like, he started more years in the NFL than he did at Notre Dame because of how loaded they were. Think about that.
That's wild.
I'm betting on Jalen Smith or Sheldon Day making a play more than I am on how a terrible Stanford, USC, and LSU defenses. That's actually a pretty easy one. Mm-hmm. But, man, I'm worried about the future of Irish Breakdown if our existence depends on any of those things having to happen. Like, I'm like, all right, well, honey, we're going to have to find something else to do. Just letting you know, IB's not going to be around a whole lot longer. Why is that? Because we need Brian Van Gorder's defense to make a stop. That's not good. It's not good at all. It's not good at all. Yeah.
Against arguably the best college offense that's ever been put together. Yeah, that's not winning odds.
Yeah, it's not. It's not at all.
I am Tenzin. Notre Dame needs to make their stadium so clearly larger than the rest of college football. I'm talking 120,000 plus.
So there's no way Notre Dame would be able to make their stadium that big. Like, they'd literally have to tear it down and start from scratch. So, and they would never consistently sell that. There'd be so many games where there's like 20,000 empty seats. They can barely sell out their 79,000 seat stadium when they play Northwestern. Like, if they're good, probably you'll sell out the big games and some of the games, but there's no way you're going to sell out when you're playing Navy, Army, teams like that. And you have to play teams like that. So no, I would never want to do that. I kind of like the feel that they have. They don't need to charge as much. They just don't. Or at the very least, don't go, just do whatever you can to prevent vendors from buying up blocks of your tickets. Just sell it through yourselves. Make people prove that they're individuals and don't let people buy more than whatever. There's things you can do if you really wanted to prevent that, but I don't think they care because they just want to make their money. That's what you do. It's not about making your stadium that big. No. The difference between like Notre Dame and like Ohio State or Tennessee or Penn State or teams that have those giant stadiums is their fan base is largely like in a region that they can drive to the game every Saturday. Notre Dame is not that way. Indiana's not that kind of state. It's just a different animal. There's nothing about Notre Dame's fan base geographically that tells us they can fill a 100,000 seat stadium. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
That's
So
fair enough.
Yeah. And then just this last one, Trev, I'm going to bring this up to you because I kind of addressed this a little bit earlier, but Ghost X says, do you see Notre Dame making any other ACC scheduling agreements? What are the chances they do this with a Big Ten team, and who, if you could scheduling those programs, would they be? So I want to just first to say, I want you to stick to the ACC part of that, because the other part, Trev and I are going to talk about in a future show. I don't want to give that away in a mailbag, because then we kind of lose that topic, because we had a nice, fun conversation about who we would like to see Notre Dame play. But I am curious to get your thoughts on ACC. Would you do this with the ACC either through scheduling a team or trying to negotiate with the ACC to, because what I said, Trev, is what's going to happen is Notre Dame, this is when you were out, Notre Dame, I think, is holding firm to the, hey, this is not going to count as an ACC game, and the ACC saying, yes, it will. And I think it's a negotiation tactic by both. Notre Dame wants to get alterations to the schedule, which has to happen because you now have 3 new teams in the league that aren't on your schedule. So I think what Notre Dame is trying to do is they're trying to position themselves, say, look, if you want us to sacrifice not making this an ACC game, we will, but we need some concessions on our end to make sure we don't get stuck one year playing Duke and Wake and this bad team and that bad team with no markets. We want at least 2 of these. We want at least 3 of these 6 teams on our schedule every year, something along those lines. So, but if you could do something like this with any other ACC team, who would it be? And then in Ghost X, we will discuss the rest in a future topic, because that's a very good question, and we have some answers for that. But we want to save that for a future summer segment.
Yeah, if I would schedule them with Miami. I think rivalries are starting to go away in college football with these super conferences, which I absolutely hate. I think that's one thing that was unique to college football, I know there's rivalries in other sports, but I just felt like college football rivalries were just a little bit more, a little bit more intense, meant a little bit more, but I would go with Miami, just with all the history of the 2 programs and all the previous beef. And I do think I'm always down for the respectful rivalries, like, hey, man, like, I like you as a program and I like you as a program, and we should have a great rivalry.
Have one that's not that.
I would also like to have one rivalry where it's just like, I just don't like you, man.
I hate that team. Yes.
Yeah, and that's why I've been a proponent of bringing back a team from the Big Ten. But
like Michigan.
Like, that's why I would like that.
Yeah.
But if I can't have that, then I would love to see it be between Miami, because of all the stuff. And now it's even better because Miami's kind of come back to the limelight a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in previous years, they're just kind of like, okay, well, they're just bad. They're just still the U. So, but they were bad. So I would like that. I love that they did it with Clemson. And then Florida State for the same reasons, a lot of history between those 2 programs. I'm not putting too much weight into the 2-10 season, as shocking as it was. I don't see Florida State being that bad again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a bigger name. If I can't have Florida State, or if they can just continue on this trend, I would look into an SMU, because they were a playoff team this past season, to get you down to play in Texas as well.
That's the attractiveness to SMU, is every time you play on the road, it gets you down to Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, look, of the 5 home games, this would be my deal with SMU. We'll play you in a 10-game series, 5-5 home and away. But 2 of your road games and 1 of our home games is going to be played on a neutral field.
I like that.
So, like, I'm trying to get them in like Arlington, and I think they would be okay with that too. Because remember, they used to play back when they had the Pony Express. They played in the Cowboy Stadium. Remember that? They moved to the Cowboy Stadium from the old Cotton Bowl to the Cowboy Stadium during the Ron Meyer era. So that would be one. I honestly am done with Stanford being on the schedule every year.
I
have zero desire to have Cal.
So don't care.
None of the North Carolina schools really interest me playing annually. The only one would be Carolina. That'd be the only one I'd be in at all. I mean, Duke doesn't bring any value to you other than just like, I want to make sure I preemptively pay them back for whatever they're going to do to our basketball team in the fall or in the winter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But Carolina would be the only one. And the other potential things are like some of your old school rivals, BC, Pitt. One of the things I would do if I was Notre Dame is like, look, we can never have a year where one of BC and Pitt's not on our schedule. Just can't happen. We have to have one of those two teams on our schedule every year. And I would like to have at least in every 10 years, at least there's at least X number of seasons where we get both of them on our schedule.
Sure.
Because I think that's where Notre Dame's in a situation where, because of the new teams of the schedule, they have the freedom to say, look, we need to rework this schedule a little bit. And based on the new deal with the ACC saying, hey, you're going to get paid more by this amount. And they say, look, we want to help out some of our old rivals. We want to play Pitt more. We want to play BC more. We know we can help build their numbers up where you guys can have Miami and Florida State play each other, and then Miami and Clemson play each other certain years and get those numbers up. But we want at least one of Pitt and BC on our schedule every single season. And at least over the next, between now and then, we want at least X number of seasons where they're both on there. And I would do something like that. But as far as anyone else that I would do something like that with, Clemson, the only ones for me is SMU, like you said, Trev, and Miami. So we're on the same page. I have no interest in playing Florida State every year. I just don't like that program, what they've become. They're kind of crybabies a little bit, to be honest with you. They're just problems. You didn't like being independent. You don't like being in the ACC. It's just, maybe you're the problem. Every relationship you get into ends up breaking up. Maybe you're the reason that keeps happening. You know what I'm saying?
I'm also not opposed to the idea of them not listening to just every other year, the war chant on every single down. That's not
yes.
I wouldn't hate not hearing that either.
Yep. Absolutely. Miami's really the only other one that I would, Pitt, BC. I wouldn't mind one of those. I wouldn't mind playing BC every year. I wouldn't mind that. I think there's a rival, a traditional aspect of that. Pitt, they've played even more games against Pitt, I believe, than Pitt's one of the teams that I believe Notre Dame has played. They're in the top 10 of times that Notre Dame has played them, I believe. Let me go look real quick. Yeah, they've played Pitt 72 times. There's no ACC teams that's even close to that. The next closest is, the next closest team is, and I'm not counting Stanford because they're not a traditional team, and they're actually not next. The team that in the ACC that Notre Dame has played the second most amount of times behind Pitt, who's number one?
Wake Forest?
Nope. Georgia Tech. They've played 38 times. Yeah, just not a ton lately, but they played a lot back in the day. They played a lot in the 60s and 70s. So from 67 to 1981, they played almost regularly. There was a stretch from 71 to 73 they didn't play. But yeah, they played games back in the their first game they ever played, they played 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games in the 20s. So that's part of it too, right? But yeah, but Pitt's a team that you've played more than anybody else. You've played Navy more than you've played Pitt. You've played Purdue more than you've played Pitt. You've played Michigan State more than you've played Pitt. You've played USC more than you've played Pitt. And that's it. Pitt is if you look at all the teams they've played, Pitt is in the top 5 of number of times you've played Notre Dame.
Wow.
So that game needs to be on your schedule more frequently.
Agreed. Yeah.
So, yeah. My thoughts. Good questions. Very good questions. Nope, I'm good. I'm good. But yes, anyway, Trev, that's going to do it for today's show. A lot of great questions there. I wanted to get a couple of those mailbags in, but good stuff today, folks. Fun discussion.
Yeah.
Fun discussion. Notre Dame, Clemson, 12 years, and I'm going to get them for 12 years. All right.
Well, it's a good setup. Well, it was a really fun show today, guys. Again, really good mailbag questions, comments. Bryan and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the buy-sell hold. Now, the thread, Salty already has the thread up on the premium message boards. Reminder, the buy-sell hold is for premium message board members, so make sure to get your buy-sell hold submissions in. IB Nation Sports Talk is going live tonight at 5 p.m., so be sure to get them. Go over and check out their show as well. I believe that starts at 5 p.m. Before you head out of here, folks, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Whatever streaming platform that you watch this on, we'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at irishbreakdown.com. boards.irishbreakdown.com. So until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.
Check out the boards right now. I got something coming up. It's going to make you want to dance.